history nerds and historians. My name is Krystina, and this is Effed Up Mythology. This is where we talk about a little tidbit from mythology that's super fucked up. So in my last episode, I did mention that I would be uploading a Troy mega episode, and here it is. So if you are like traveling throughout this holiday season, or on a road trip, when you're on a plane, anything like that, and you just want to listen just straight through, only have to download one thing, that is what this is for. So I'm going to go through, upload everything pretty much as it was uploaded on to the page originally. I'll take out like the introductions, and I'll take out the little conclusions, and then everything will just be all together in one big mega episode for you. So I hope you enjoy. I hope that you have a great holiday season. Please take care of yourself and know that you are loved. And without further ado, sit back, relax, and practice your oh good God, what the fuck faces. Troy Part 1. Wait, this was all over an apple? So the thing with mythology is that you can always say, like, here is where a myth begins. But mythology is so complex that although a certain point may be where people have determined a specific story to begin, there are usually other myths that have happened before that contribute to certain aspects of the myth that you're discussing. So figuring out exactly where I wanted to start the telling of the Trojan War was something I did put a lot of thought into. And I think the best place to start is just with Zeus and his Zeusness fucking up everything because he couldn't control his dick, which is like honestly how a lot of these myths start. But in this case, it was over a nymph named Thetis. Thetis was specifically a kind of nymph called a Nereid. The Nereids were a group of 50 sea nymphs who were daughters of the old man of the sea named Nereus. Nereid literally means like the wet ones. So they embody different aspects of the sea, like the brine, the foam, sand, waves, the currents, etc., etc., etc. They were deities of the sea's bounty and protected those who traveled the sea. Now their father was elderly, so Thetis was sort of like their unofficial leader. She was the strongest of the Nereids. She wasn't the oldest, but she was the strongest, and so she sort of like was the unofficial leader. But she wasn't just a nymph who just like sat along the water or like sunbathed or lured men to their deaths or whatever. She was actually responsible for saving quite a few of the Olympians. So at one point, Poseidon, Hera, Apollo, and Athena revolted against Zeus. They thought that he had become a tyrant. They didn't like what he was doing with his power, so they actually like restrained him so that he couldn't use his lightning or he couldn't rule. And when they did this, Thetis was the one who found him and freed him. And then later on, when both Dionysus and Hephaestus were expelled from Mount Olympus and thrown into the sea, Thetis was the one who saved them again. And how did they repay her for this? Well, she was very beautiful. And before long, she caught the attention of Zeus and his brother Poseidon. They both wanted to marry her, even though they were both already married. Zeus, of course, was married to Hera, and Poseidon was married to Amphitrite. Now, Zeus and Poseidon were sort of fighting over who would take her first, if you will, like who would rape her first, because these encounters were like rarely consensual, but we just won't talk about that right now. But there was a prophecy that said that Thetis would give birth to a child who would be more powerful than his father, and Zeus and Poseidon did not want that to happen, especially Zeus, because he became king of the gods by being more powerful than his father and overthrowing him. So Zeus conspired with an older mortal king named Peleus that he would marry Thetis so that his child would be powerful, would be great among mortals, but not more powerful than Zeus. Peleus was known as the most pious man in the plain of Iolcus, which I find contradictory to his later actions. So according to Ovid, Peleus made his way to where Thetis laid on the shore, and he attempted to rape her, but she kept changing form. She turned into a living flame, water, a lioness, a serpent, and he was unsuccessful. So he sought out help from the gods. So Zeus went to Chiron, who was a centaur that's known like not for violence and savagery like a lot of the other centaurs that we've discussed, but instead he deviates from the stereotype and was known for his wisdom and his knowledge of medicine and for training some of the best warriors in mythology like Heracles and Achilles and Jason and blah, 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 blah. But he was still a misogynist. And Thetis, unfortunately, is just another example of hundreds of myths where women are disrespected and treated like property and sexually assaulted when they didn't give in. So Chiron told Zeus and Peleus that if Thetis would not agree to marry Peleus, then Peleus must just tie her down and take her by force. Peleus attacked Thetis while she slept. He tied her down and he assaulted her as she changed form again. So she's biting and she's thrashing and she still is not able to get free until finally she realizes that Peleus has most likely been helped by a god of some sort, and there's no chance that she'll be able to get away. And then, because Zeus has deemed it necessary that she marry Peleus, she's forced to marry her rapist. So Zeus is very excited for her, and the fact that her son that she's probably already pregnant with will not be stronger than him. So Zeus, in his excitement for her wedding, throws her and Peleus a party, and they invite everyone, all of the gods and the goddesses, except for one, Eris, goddess of discord and chaos. And she was not happy about this and just like channeled her inner Maleficent. So Eris busts into the room and everyone goes silent and turns and looks at her, and she takes in everyone in the room. She smiles maniacally and pulls out a single golden apple. She then tosses this apple into the middle of the room and leaves. And on the apple was inscribed 3 words: "For the fairest." Well, immediately Aphrodite steps forward. She is the goddess of love, after all, and that is obviously someone who is fair. But then Hera also steps forward. She's queen of the gods and ruled over women and marriage, and if anyone was the fairest, it was her. And then Athena steps forward as well. She is like, I am a virgin goddess, and also the goddess of wisdom. If anyone were to know who the fairest is, it would be me, and I am clearly the fairest. And chaos ensued. The goddesses would not stop fighting over who was the fairest. And finally, one of them turns to Zeus and asks him to intervene and decide who the fairest is for them. Now, this puts him in a very rough situation. Hera is his wife, and Athena and Aphrodite are his daughters, even though in some versions Aphrodite is not his daughter. In the Iliad and in this story of the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, she is the daughter of Zeus and the goddess Dione. So like rock in a hard place, and Zeus is right in the middle, right? But while they're fighting, Ares, god of war, speaks up and says he knows a mortal that is honest and true, and he would be perfect to make the decision. And this mortal has a very interesting backstory. So in Troy, the king is a man named Priam, and his wife is Hecuba. So it's said that Priam has 50 sons and 50 daughters because he was busy. Although Wikipedia, which I mean we all know is not a reliable source, but it's a good for a quick reference every now and then if you take it with a grain of salt, says that he had 69 sons. Giggity. So thankfully for Hecuba's vagina, they aren't all with her, but this mortal that was eventually chosen to make this decision was the child of Hecuba and Priam. Now, when Hecuba was pregnant with this child right before she went into labor, she dreamed that she gave birth to a flaming torch, which just sounds super uncomfy. So she went to a seer and she asked what this dream may have meant, if it was an omen of some sort, and she was told, yes, it is. This child is going to be the downfall and destruction of Troy. So just like a super fun omen, right? So a few days later, when Hecuba gave birth, this same seer came in and told mom and dad that this child needed to be killed to spare all of Troy, and he needed to be killed immediately. But Hecuba and Priam couldn't bring themselves to kill the child, so they gave him to a servant and asked him to do it. But just like we've seen before with Oedipus, when the servant brought him up to the mountain, he couldn't bring himself to kill the child. So he just left them there, hoping that he would die of exposure. But he did not die of exposure because just like with the Atalanta myth, he was suckled by a female bear. After 9 days, the servant returned and saw that this newborn was still alive and kicking, and figured that he was being spared by the gods, and brought him home to raise as his own in secret. The servant was a shepherd, so the child was raised on a farm. Now, this child was a fantastic child. He was brave and beautiful and intelligent. When he was a child, he was given the name Alexander, which meant protector of men, after he outsmarted a gang of cattle thieves and then brought all of the cattle back to their owners. But one of his favorite things to do when he was growing up was to bullfight. And I don't mean like a matador kind of bullfighting. I mean like cockfighting or dogfighting, where you like pit the two animals against each other. But he started noticing when he was doing these bullfights that one of his bulls was winning consistently. So he started challenging other shepherds to bullfights. He then said that he would give a golden crown to anyone who could defeat this bull. Ares, god of war, disguised himself as a bull and won, and the young man immediately handed it over. And this honesty was something that he was regarded for the rest of his life, and was why Ares recommended him for the job. Who is this honest man? They asked him. Well, Ares continues, a bit after this bullfight, there was a large festival taking place in the city of Troy. King Priam sent out some of his best servants to find the best bull to sacrifice to the gods, and they find themselves on Alexander's farm. And they see this prize bull and decide this is the bull that's going to be sacrificed. And Alexander decides that he is going to go with them because, I mean, it's his bull, but also he's never been to the city and he wants to see what it's all about. And when he got there was a boxing contest with all the sons of Priam, all 50 to 69 of them, and he won every single match. And this just pissed off two of Priam's sons, namely his strongest son, Hector. So these two sons wanted to kill this unknown son of a shepherd who thought that he was great enough to take on all of their brothers. So they cornered this shepherd, Alexander. But before they could attack, his father jumped in front of Priam and recounted every detail of this young man's life and revealed that this child was indeed not Alexander, but the child that he was supposed to leave on the mountainside so long ago, the child that they thought was dead, the child that they called Paris. Priam welcomed his assumed dead son back with open arms, and he became Paris of Troy. So the man who made the judgment between the three goddesses was Paris of Troy, in an event which became known as the Judgment of Paris. So Hermes, the messenger god, brought everyone before Paris and told him what happened and told him that it was his choice. And he's like, hello, ladies. I mean, goddesses. Welcome to my home. How the hell am I going to decide? You're all beautiful, you're all fair, and whoever I don't pick will probably be very upset with me and most likely seek out retaliation against me and my people at some point in a way that is not a foreshadowing at all. So Athena steps forward and tells him, I'm clearly the fairest, but if you choose me, I'll sweeten the deal a little bit. If you pick me, I will make you the wisest and most fierce warrior. Hera steps forward and was like, yeah, forget that. We all know I'm the fairest. And to sweeten the deal, if you pick me, I'll make you king of all of Europe and Asia, and you won't have to lift a single fucking finger, and you won't have to lose any men in the process. I'll just give it to you if you choose me. So the two of them sort of argue back and forth and are like, no, I'm better. No, I'm better. And Paris is like, ladies. These are great gifts that you're offering me, but we haven't heard from Aphrodite yet. Aphrodite, you heard what these two are offering if I pick them. Do you have anything to offer to sweeten the deal if I pick you? And like, when I imagine the scene, I see Athena and Hera sort of like focusing solely on each other, arguing back and forth, as Aphrodite is just like leaning against the wall, inspecting her nails or like filing her nails, and just like the embodiment of aloofness. And when Paris is like, what will you give me? She's just like, oh yeah, if you pick me, I'll give you the hottest wife. And Paris is like, sold. Yep. I pick her. I pick Aphrodite. She is the fairest. I want that. I would love a super hot wife. Who's it going to be? Who's the most beautiful woman in the world? Because if she's to be my wife, I want to know who it is. Aphrodite's like, well, I mean, the most beautiful woman in the world is Helen of Sparta, but and Paris interrupts her and is like, whatever else you're going to say, I don't care. I am down. I'm here for it. I say yes. I don't regret my decision at all. I don't think that there's anything that could ever happen that would make me regret this decision. When do we start? When do I get to have sex with that? I mean her. When do I get to have sex with her? So since this episode is all about backstories and Helen is like obviously important, let's talk about her and how she became the face that launched 1,000 ships that she's known. So Helen is the daughter of Zeus and Leda, although in some tellings she is Nemesis's daughter, but in the Iliad she's daughter of Leda. So Leda was queen of Sparta, and her husband was a man named Tyndareus. But Leda was very beautiful, and Zeus and all of his Zeusness desired to be with her. So he disguised himself one day as a swan and happened to come upon Leda when an eagle was pursuing him, and he fell into her arms for protection, and then they engaged in bestiality, I guess. I don't know. But a little later, Leda laid 2 eggs. And from those eggs came Helen, her sister Clytemnestra, Castor, and Pollux. I honestly think that that's probably like one of my favorite, like Zeus and all of his Zeusness ways. I also like when he comes to a woman as a golden shower. That one's also pretty great. And then of course we have like he comes to one woman as a bull. So we'll talk about all of this at some point. But Zeus is very creative. He didn't just like show up and like have sex with people or be like, I'm Zeus. Like you know, like King Henry VIII, he'd be like, I desire you. You're coming to my bedchamber tonight. And then like he would have lovers because he was the king and that's what he could do. No, like Zeus was very creative when it came to his love making or whatever. So anyway, Leda lays her eggs, and then Helen, her sister Clytemnestra, Castor, and Pollux are born. So even though these children may have been the children of Zeus, they could have also partially been the children of Tyndareus as well. Kind of like what we talked about with Meleager in the Atalanta episode, where they thought that they might have had dual parentage and been like half divine and half like normal. In other versions, as he explained, that half of them are children of Zeus and then half of them are children of Tyndareus. So you have Helen and Pollux, who are from Zeus, and then Clytemnestra and Castor, who are from Tyndareus. I think that version is the one that I see more often because it links to the Castor and Pollux myth later on, where Pollux is immortal and he loves his brother so much that he begs Zeus to share his immortality with his brother. And then that's how they become Castor and Pollux of the Gemini constellation. So, I mean, regardless, Helen is daughter of Zeus. One day, Tyndareus was sacrificing to the gods and forgot to honor Aphrodite. And so she swore that one day she would take revenge on Tyndareus and all of his descendants. Like, guys, if you just made a fucking list of all the gods and goddesses that need to be honored, it would solve like half of your problems in these stupid fucking myths. So when she was younger, Helen was kidnapped by Theseus, which is just really, really nice to be back into a reality in which Theseus is garbage. Because Atalanta and like partially the Odysseus myth like really had me questioning it there for a little bit. And I'm just very, very happy that you know, Theseus can be garbage again. So Theseus decided that he wanted to marry daughter of Zeus and decided that even though Helen was like a young teenager at the time, that she was it. He was going to marry her. So he met up with one of his friends named Pirithous, who is king of Larissa, and just went and kidnapped her from Sparta one day. And he brought her back to Athens and he left her with his mom while Pirithous decided who he wanted to marry. They were going to like kidnap each other's wives for them in some weird sort of bachelor party. So Pirithous decided, no, you can marry a daughter of Zeus. She's the most beautiful woman in the world. She's the most beautiful mortal woman in the world. I want better than that. I aspire for greatness. I want to marry the dread Persephone. We're going to go down to the underworld and we're going to kidnap her from the underworld and bring her back up because, you know, Hades kidnapped her and brought her into the underworld. So it's only right if we kidnap her and bring her back, and then like we'll force her to marry me, and then I'll have a goddess for a wife, and then she'll be like the most beautiful of every living thing in the world. Like there's nothing that could go wrong with this. So they go into the underworld, and Hades is like, yeah, no, you're not stealing my wife. And he throws Theseus into underworld jail and then has Fluffy Cerberus tear Pirithous to pieces. And while Theseus is in jail in the underworld, Castor and Pollux go to Athens and they take Helen back to Sparta. So a little while later, Tyndareus was like, okay, Helen needs a husband. Come on, like put your name in the hat. We'll figure out who's going to be her husband. And all these suitors come from all over to sort of, you know, just put their name in the hat. And Menelaus ends up being the one who Helen picks. And then later on, when Leda and Tyndareus abdicate the throne, they become king and queen of Sparta. But before that happens, while all of these suitors are in front of them, Tyndareus makes them pledge an oath that if Helen were to ever be abducted in the future, because it's said that she's the most beautiful woman in the world, that all of these suitors from cities all over Greece would step in and help get her back. They didn't want another Theseus situation. So one could argue that the Trojan War was indeed not caused by Paris and Paris desiring Helen, but Theseus, because if he hadn't kidnapped her, there would have been no reason for the oath. And if there was no oath, then all of these suitors and kings from all over Greece would not have been contractually obligated to fight in the coming war. Because I have a theory that everything is Theseus's fault. Now I just have to figure out a way to link every myth somehow back to Theseus, and then we would just live in a perfect world, and I would reach such completion that I would probably become a constellation. You'll see me in the sky. Krystina of Effed Up History is a new constellation, probably by the Gemini constellation, because we're talking about Castor and Pollux when I made this realization, and also I'm a Gemini, so that works as well. Anyway, obligatory Theseus rant now finished. When Paris was promised Helen by Aphrodite, it wasn't like Helen and Menelaus had just gotten married. Like he just didn't make it to the meeting of suitors and she would have picked him if she could have. No, Menelaus and Helen had 4 children together. They had a daughter named Hermione and 3 sons, Pleisthenes, Aethiolus, and Merophius. Apologies, we all know pronunciation of Greek names is not my strong suit, but I'm doing my best. So presumably, even if she got pregnant back to back, they've still been married for at least 4 years when Paris comes to Sparta on a, quote, diplomatic mission. So when Priam mentioned that there was a need to go to Sparta, Paris volunteered, and he knew what he was going to do when he got there. He wasn't going as an emissary. He was going to steal Helen, and his sister Cassandra knew that he was going to do this as well. Now, Cassandra was a prophetess, but unfortunately she was also cursed. See, years before, the god of prophecy Apollo desired her and she rejected him. So to try and entice her, he gave her the gift of prophecy, but she still rejected him again. Mortals don't just reject gods, you know? So Apollo cursed her. He let her keep his gift of prophecy, but no one would ever believe what she had to say. And it would be her punishment for the rest of her life to see these horrible things that were about to happen and then be utterly useless at preventing them from happening. So when Paris volunteered, she screamed and echoed the prophecy that Hecuba received before his birth, that he would be the downfall and destruction of Troy, but no one listened, and Paris left for Sparta. So when Paris gets to Sparta, he's like, yeah, I am totally here on behalf of Troy to foster good relations, and I am very good at relations. What's up, Helen? How you doing? Now, the moment that Helen looks at Paris, Eros, who is better known in popular culture by his Roman name Cupid, shoots one of his love arrows at her, and she immediately becomes crazy in love with him, so much so that when Menelaus leaves to go to Crete to attend either a birthday or a funeral, depending on what translation you read, she abandons her children and sneaks away with him back to Troy and becomes Helen of Troy. Although some versions say that she was kidnapped and taken against her will. Now, some parts of the myth say that she was very happy. Others say that she was really sad in Troy, that she regretted leaving or regretted leaving her children, at least. She's also portrayed as feeling guilty over what happened later on. This is definitely something that's seen in the Iliad. She calls herself a bitch and a traitor and you know, spends almost every scene shit-talking Paris. But when Menelaus comes back and he finds out what happens, he calls in that oath that they swore years ago before he even married Helen of Troy, that if she were to ever be abducted again, whether by her own will or not, that all of the suitors would come to defend her and would come to get her back. And Helen becomes the face that launches 1,000 ships. Troy, Part 2. Wow, these mythological dads all really suck. So like we mentioned in the last episode, Peleus and Thetis are married. So while everything with like Athena and Hera and Aphrodite is happening, and with Paris of Troy and all of that. When all of that stuff is happening, Peleus and Thetis make a baby, right? So Thetis becomes pregnant with Peleus's child, and the gods rejoice that she will give birth to the greatest among mortals, but that he will not be better than a god. And Zeus is like, hell yeah, I made the right decision allowing Peleus to rape her and take her as a wife. I have done nothing wrong in this situation. Everything is perfect and everything is awesome, as am I. So after the standard 9 or so months, Thetis gives birth to Peleus' son, and they name him Achilles. Now, there are some sources that say that her and Peleus actually had 7 children, but the first 6 died. Every night, Thetis would try to remove the mortality from Achilles, which is where some of the stories that their first 6 children died come into play, because removing the mortality from someone is not an easy task. I know, if you've read the book Circe, she just, gives them a flower, and, that makes them immortal in some of these senses. But, no. No. In one version of this myth, she tries to remove Achilles' mortality by bathing him in ambrosia and nectar during the day, and then at night tossing him into a fire, or holding him over a fire and literally trying to burn the mortality off of him. And then the other way is by dipping Achilles in the river Styx, which is super dangerous and poisonous. So with Achilles, he actually survived these. They may have had more children who didn't survive these, but Achilles survives these. Now with the version in which he's dipped into the river Styx, they just held him by his heel, not realizing that that was the spot that would be an insta-death for him. And in the other version, she bathed him in ambrosia and was in the process of setting him on fire when Peleus comes in and is like, what the fuck are you doing? Are you making baby barbecue? Get the baby out of the fire and put that thing where it came from, or so help me. And in that version, she sort of just drops Achilles and is like, yeah, I'm fucking done, and then goes back to the ocean. Regardless, her attempts at making him immortal are not successful. So that whole son of Thetis would be better than his father thing. Okay, Achilles was destined to not only be better than his father, but was said to be the best warrior in the world. And he would be the best warrior that the world has ever and would ever see. So Achilles, once Thetis leaves, there are some versions, and the version that's mentioned in Song of Achilles is that Thetis is required to live with Peleus for 1 year, and the moment that year is up, she goes back to the ocean. But then in others, she just abandons Achilles once Peleus walks in on them. So Achilles is essentially just raised by Peleus and Pythia. And when Achilles is a little older, Peleus sends him to train with Chiron the centaur. Like I said in the last episode, Chiron is not like the other centaurs that we ran into in other myths. He's wise and relatively civilized, even though he's a misogynist, and he trains Achilles to be a fierce warrior. So time has passed, and news has spread that Helen has been taken, whether by her own accord or not, and that oath is now being called in. It's essentially like the draft at this point. Now, the main people that are called in to fight are Menelaus, obviously. Husband of Helen. He has a lot of stake in this. Also, his brother Agamemnon, who is king of Mycenae, who was richer and has a bigger army, and he steps in and says, I will lead the army for you, brother, because I care so much about you, and I care that you have been cucked by your wife. But also Troy is said to be a really, really rich city, and I would like some of that gold and riches, please. So it was for his brother, but also for himself as well, There was also Nestor, who was the king of Pylos. He was super old. He's actually an Argonaut, so we've mentioned him in passing a couple times, but he was still a warrior and he was ready to go fight, but he was mostly has to come for his wisdom and long ass old man stories about the good old days when blah blah happened. I swear, every time he's mentioned in the Iliad, it's followed by 15 pages of oh, when I was a young man, we went uphill backwards while also fighting off Amazons, or fucking whatever. He's really annoying. I usually just skip over a lot of what he's saying, unfortunately. Diomedes is also another one. I can't figure out if I like him or not. I go back and forth. He's annoying as hell most of the time in the Iliad, but he has some parts that are like absolutely fantastic. He was the king of Argos and was a really great warrior. He was relatively young, probably like the third greatest warrior in the Greek army. The second greatest warrior was Ajax the Great, or the Greater, not to be confused with Ajax the Lesser, which poor dude, if that's how you're regarded. And then there was Odysseus. Odysseus is honestly probably like one of the most well-known of these men outside of Achilles, and that's most likely because of the Odyssey, which is his story of what happens once the Trojan War is complete. So, spoiler, he lives. The story is also like 3,000 years old, so I'm sorry to tell you like this if you don't know. Odysseus was a fun dude. He's really interesting. So it's said that he was loved the most by Athena, and the only other warrior in the Trojan War who is loved to that extent was Diomedes, and they shared her biggest qualities. So Diomedes was courageous and skillful in battle, and then Odysseus was wise and cunning. So I just like to say that he's a trickster. Typically it's like trickster gods, but Odysseus, pretty much every time you see him, he's hatching plans to be tricky. And the first time we see him, he's trying to play a trick. And when the men come to bring him to war, he does not go without trying to stay behind, because Odysseus just got married recently to Penelope, who is the cousin of Helen. And she just had their son Telemachus, and he didn't want to leave his wife and his new son for a war that he honestly had no personal stake in. So he pretends to be insane because an oracle told him that if he leaves, it would be a very long time before he returns home. So when the men come to get Odysseus from Ithaca, he yokes a donkey and an ox to his plow. Some versions say that it's a horse and an ox that he yokes instead. But regardless of like what animal they are, they're different weights, they're different strengths, they're different stride lengths. So he's already setting himself up for failure, right? And as he's, using these two animals that are not well equipped to work together to plow his field, he starts sowing salt in the ground, which, yeah, it's not seeds, but also in addition to that, it's going to ruin his soil. So he's just mumbling to himself and he's acting like he's gone insane. So that way maybe they'll be like, oh no, we can't have him come in. It reminds me of like Across the Universe, where he's just pretending to be sick so that they won't get him for the draft. And just like in Across the Universe, they're like, nope, you're fine. As long as you don't have flat feet, you're good. So one of the men takes baby Telemachus, who was just born, out of Penelope's arms and lays it in front of the plow. And Odysseus veers the plow off so that he doesn't run over his baby. And then like, oop, poof, just kidding. He's not insane at all anymore. He's actually just pretending, because like that's the only way that you can prove if someone is insane or not, is by like trying to kill a baby. So he officially joins the ranks of the Greeks. Now, an oracle, who we all know how I feel about oracles, they told the Greeks that they would not be able to win against Troy without Achilles. But an oracle also told either Peleus or Thetis that if Achilles were to go to Troy, he wouldn't come back. He would die over there. The way it's usually described is, Achilles, if you stay home, you will live a long life. You will father many children. You will die loved, and over time your name will be forgotten. But if you go to Troy, you will not come back, but the world will never forget your name. And one day, some random girl who has a thing for history and mythology will sit in front of a mic and tell your story. The oracle knew how much I would hate her and is trying to win my favor, and it's not working. So either Peleus or Thetis, depending on what version or translation you read, did not want him to go to Troy. They didn't want him to die while he was over there. More often than not, it's Thetis who does this because, she was the one that was trying to make him immortal. So Thetis goes to Achilles at Cheiron's and told him that they're going to flee and hide. They're also going to dress Achilles up like a girl, and he's going to go by the name Pyrrha, which means flame-colored, basically confirming that Achilles was a ginger. And he tries to kind of fight back and doesn't really want to do it, but he's told he doesn't have a choice. And I think that for a lot of people, this would be kind of weird. So I think for a lot of people, their first exposure to the story of the Trojan War is the 2004 movie Troy. I know that was mine. And then in school, I read the Odyssey. And with that being your first exposure to Achilles and company, you'd be like, dude, he's a man. Just let him go to fucking war if he wants to go to fucking war. because Brad Pitt was 40 years old when he played Achilles. But Achilles in real life, or I guess like in real myth, IRM, was a child. He was anywhere from 11 to his late teens. The consensus among most classicists and historians is that he's probably about 15 years old. So if your parent comes to you, especially if that parent is your mother, who is a goddess or nymph, rather, that should not be trifled with, and tells you that you're going away and you're going to dress as a girl and go by the name Pyrrha, you're going to throw on the fucking dress and go. So they put Achilles in women's clothing. He is young and beautiful, so it's pretty convincing. And they take him to Skyros before King Lycomedes. And they asked Lycomedes if he could take in Pyrrha and let her live amongst his 7 daughters so she could learn how to be a girl and how to be a wife, because she was raised by the Amazons and wasn't exposed to the feminine ways. And Lycomedes accepts Achilles/Pyrrha, but while he's there, Achilles falls in love with one of Lycomedes' daughters named Deiodamia. And one night he reveals his true identity to her and confesses his feelings, and she claims to feel the same, and the two secretly get married, and they have a son named Neoptolemus, who I think that I might hate just as much as Theseus. Actually, I think I might hate him more than Theseus. Like, I despise Theseus. I think Theseus is like my mortal enemy, and Neoptolemus is evil incarnate. But we'll get to him. So Achilles is hiding in Skyros, pretending to be the female Pyrrha, and Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, who is married to Helen's sister Clytemnestra, he's trying to help him like build this army and get Helen back. And with that prophecy in mind that the Greeks can't win against Troy without Achilles, Agamemnon sends some of the largest names from Greece to try and find him. So Odysseus was the one who led this group of people trying to find him. And depending on what version or translation you read, he's accompanied by Ajax the Great, Nestor, Phoenix, who in the Iliad is said that he like raised Achilles essentially, and Diomedes. So the band of these men arrive at Skyros looking for Achilles, and they're pretty sure that he's there because they were told so by Calchas, who was a prophet. And when they arrive, Achilles wants to step forward and reveal himself, but he's convinced not to by his wife. So Odysseus, who, like I said, I just call him a trickster, figures out a way to try to make Achilles reveal himself. Now, depending on what version you read, there's 2 ways that he did this. The first is that when he came in, he laid out 2 sets of gifts for the women of Skyros. And in one basket, there was jewelry and trinkets, silk, etc., things that women would like, obviously. And in the other basket, there were like weapons and armor, manly things, bacon, Old Spice, explosions that you don't look at and just walk away from, burps, rulers where inches are smaller than the standard, cars with 274 horsepower. Is that even a lot? Who knows? Not me. I'm just a woman. I'm gonna go for the shiny basket. I have paused this recording to ask my husband if 274 horsepower is a lot, and he looked at me in the eye with such disappointment and then said my full given name and walked away. So I am assuming that 274 horsepower is not a lot. Oh God, cars are not my strong suit, guys. Anyway, so they put these 2 baskets out, and all of the biological women went to the trinkets, and Achilles went straight for the weapons, and that's how he was revealed. And the other version that's sometimes told, which is like the version that's told in Song of Achilles, they still put the 2 baskets out, but Achilles keeps it together and continues to act like a girl until one of the men with Odysseus steps out and simulates an attack on Skyros, shouting for aid and blowing the horn that symbols an attack. And Achilles jumps to action, and he picks up the weapons to defend everyone that was there. And Odysseus is like, "Hey man, there you are. Time to go to Troy." And Achilles is like, "Yeah, fair, bro. Let me just get out of this here dress and say bye to the wife." And he promises Deiodamia that he'll come back. But, I mean, that is not what the prophecy said. There's another version of this myth that I found when I was researching it that isn't as popular, I think, that it was told because people sort of had a problem with Achilles being kind of emasculated by this. So, that's my opinion, but that's... So... this other version is that Achilles went and conquered Skyros and imprisoned Lycomedes and just took Deiodamia as a wife, and that's how Odysseus and his men found him. But it's not nearly as fun as Achilles in a dress jumping on a table defending all of the women and people behind him, right? So now that the Greeks have their smoking gun and they've made their way to the port of Aulis in Boeotia to meet with Agamemnon and then eventually leave for Troy. Calchas the seer is there, and out of nowhere this giant snake with blood-red marks along its back appears, and it made its way to a sparrow's nest, and it devoured 8 chicks and the mother. And once the birds were devoured, the snake just disappeared. And Calchas is like, this is a message from the gods to prepare for a long time away from home, because it means that we will be gone for 9 years before anything happens. But on the 10th year, we will take Troy. And why don't they just wait for 9 years? I couldn't tell you. I'm sorry, but logic tells me that if you're not going to do anything for 9 years, just wait for 9 years, and then on the 10th year, sail to Troy, and then you'll be good. But, you know, that would just make sense, right? So all of the men are about to leave for Troy, knowing that it's going to take 10 years before anything is going to happen, and then Agamemnon goes and pisses off Artemis when he kills a sacred deer. Now, Artemis did not react nearly as hard as she did in the Atalanta myth, but she did stop the winds. And back then, you couldn't go anywhere without the wind on a ship. Even though they had people that rowed, you couldn't sustainably do that for the trip that, according to Google, would have been like over 400 miles. So Calchas, the same seer that told Odysseus where Achilles was, told Agamemnon what happened and what he needed to do. So Agamemnon went and told Achilles that he was going to marry Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia. Now, even though Achilles was already married, it was fine. Even though everything that I've read said that they weren't allowed to have multiple wives, but I'm not a classicist, so Achilles is going to marry Iphigenia. So Iphigenia shows up a few days later with her mother Clytemnestra, and she's so excited to marry the beautiful young warrior, and she walks up to go to the wedding arch, but instead finds a funeral pyre. Artemis has demanded a life for a life. She wants a sacrifice, and it isn't a sacrifice if it doesn't hurt someone to lose it. And Achilles freaks out. Not only does he not want her to be sacrificed for the simple purpose of human sacrifice is not cool, but he's pissed that Agamemnon used him as bait to bring about her death. And Agamemnon's wife, Clytemnestra, is swearing her revenge if he does it. Achilles is trying to rally the troops to defend her, and no one will join him. Everyone is demanding that the sacrifice is carried out, and the more that Achilles argues, the more enraged the soldiers get, to the point where Achilles barely escapes being stoned to death. And Iphigenia sees this whole ordeal and realizes that she's not getting out of here alive. So she goes to Achilles and she asks him to not throw his life away for her. And her mother is screaming and crying and swearing, and they're having to hold her back because she's trying to attack Agamemnon. She's trying to grab her daughter Iphigenia to get out of there as fast as she can. She's swearing revenge against her husband if he even lays a finger on their daughter. But Iphigenia consents to be sacrificed. She said that she would rather die heroically as a savior of Greece than to be dragged away and slaughtered mercilessly. And if it isn't her father, who will do it quickly, it'll be one of the hundreds, if not thousands, of soldiers that are standing by waiting for her blood to start flowing. So she goes to her death with composure and dignity, leading a hymn to Artemis. The moment that the first drop of blood hits the ground, the winds come back, and we have the first casualty of the Trojan War. Troy Part 3. Let's get ready to mythologically rumble! Achilles is pissed at Agamemnon. The Iliad begins on the brink of the 10th year into the Trojan War, just like Calchas predicted. Again, why they couldn't just wait 9 years before taking off makes too much sense to actually do it. So the Greeks, and I say the Greeks, so side note, Krystina has just begun and we're already going off on a tangent, but side note, I'm gonna call them the Greeks because that's just easier. In the Iliad, they call them a lot of different names, typically calling them by the name of the country that is associated with the group that they're talking about, or they'll have like a few different names for them in general, but then there's also like the Myrmidons, I think is how it's pronounced, which is specifically Achilles' men, and then, you know, so there's a lot of groups from Greece that are making up the Greek army. So to go and specifically call each one by each name is just really, really confusing. So I'm just going to call them the Greeks. And it's similar with the Trojans as well. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call them the Trojans, even though a lot of what makes up the Trojan army are not even people from Troy. It's like their allies that come to help them. But it's just way confusing if you try to go by like the 17 different names that they call the armies at any given time. So the Greeks have plundered 23 cities surrounding Troy. And in that, they have taken many spoils of war, including 130 women that were divided amongst the captains as slaves, because remember, women are property. So the most notable of these women are Chryseis, who was given to Agamemnon, and Briseis, who was given to Achilles. We love those rhyming names here. They make it not confusing to listen to at all. So as Italy begins, there is a plague that has fallen on the Greek camp, and people are dying left and right because Agamemnon has honored the priest of Apollo named Chryses, who made his way into the Greek camp to beg and pay for his daughter Chryseis' freedom. So Chryses is like, yo, I hope the gods give you all the luck when it comes to taking over the city of Troy. I honestly don't give a fuck about it. I hope you kill all of Priam's men and then have a trip back home that is just like so safe and so quick and uneventful that it is even worth talking about. But please, may I have my daughter back? And he doesn't just say this like, hey, I would like my daughter back. He's like, here, I will give you a lot of things in exchange for my daughter. I just want my daughter back. And Agamemnon tells him no. Agamemnon tells him no and to fuck off. And if he sees him again, then not even Apollo will be able to spare the priest. He's going to keep his daughter. When the war is done, she's going back to Argos with him, and she will be my slave in the working and sexual sense. I think at one point he even says that like he loves her more than his own wife, which is fun. So the priest of Apollo, who had not been trained as a warrior, leaves like he's told. And when he gets far enough away from the camp that he feels safe, he stops and he asks Apollo, if you recognize me as your priest and I've honored you well, I have built you the best temple, if I have given you the best offerings, if I have lived my life to your liking, then fucking decimate these Greek sons of bitches and let them suffer while you do it. And apparently Chryses is the best fucking priest because pretty much immediately Apollo answers. He descends from Mount Olympus with fury. He comes upon the Greek camp like the knight incarnate, and he starts fucking shit up and killing everything in sight. First, he kills all the dogs and mules, which is not cool because I mean, what did the dogs do? Like, why did the dogs always have to die? They didn't ask to be there. They didn't ask to be Greek. And then once he's done killing the dogs and the mules, he starts on the men, and soon the plague erupts in the Greek camp, and people are dying so quickly and in such mass numbers that the funeral pyres seem to be never ending. And this lasts for 9 days until Hera cannot take it anymore. The Trojan War sort of like split the Olympians down the middle when it came to like who they were supporting. So some of them were supporting the Greeks and then others were supporting the Trojans, and Hera was on the Greek side. So seeing the Greeks die in droves made her incredibly distraught, understandably. So on the 10th morning, she whispered in Achilles' ear and planted an idea in his head. So he gathered all the healthy men that he could and approached Agamemnon and was like, dude, this plague is making it so that we won't even get in to Troy at this rate. We're going to be forced to go back to Greece if we can even go home at all. So let's go to an oracle or seer and see if they can tell us what god we made angry and how we can fix that, even though we, as the reader / listener, are already fucking know. And this is called dramatic irony. So the second that Achilles sits down, Calchas, who we've talked about before, he was the one who interpreted the omen from Artemis about Iphigenia needing to be sacrificed. He was the one that interpreted that it would take 10 years to get into Troy. He was also the one who said that Achilles was at Skyros. So, you know, Calchas, one of the greatest seers among the Greeks, and he stands up and is like, Achilles, you asked me to look into this, but you have to promise me that you'll defend me and that no one, Agamemnon, will kill the messenger, or rather the messenger of the gods in this case. And Achilles agrees, and Calchas tells us what we already know, that Agamemnon has pissed off Apollo. He needs to give back Chryseis and sacrifice 100 oxen and goats. And Agamemnon stands up and he's pissed. He's like, Calchas, why are you never fucking on my side? And of fucking course you would say that I have to give her back. And that really upsets me because I love her more than my wife Clytemnestra. See, there it is. Chryseis is prettier and she's smarter and she has a better body and she's better with her body. So I have to give her back. If I have to do that, I want another woman. And Achilles is like, do you think we just have like a stockpile of women lying around? Okay, yeah, if you give her back when we attack Troy, you will get you 4 women to replace her. And Agamemnon is like, no, I want one now. Maybe I'll just take yours, Achilles. What was her name again? Briseis? And Achilles is like, fuck that shit. If you take Briseis, if you take my prize, I'm just going to go the fuck home. This is bullshit. I came here for you and your brother. I have nothing against the Trojans. They've literally never done anything to me. And I am not going to fucking fight for you anymore with you threatening to take my prize, which we have to remember is, of course, a woman that was given to me. Good luck winning this fucking war without me, because wait, what was that? What was it that the Oracle said before we left? Oh, yeah. You can't win without me. Bye, bitch. Die, bitch. And Achilles considers just like drawing his sword and killing Agamemnon there. But Athena comes down and grabs him by his hair, kinky, and she tells him to back off and that Agamemnon will pay. So Achilles is like, this is good enough for me. I think I will just stay here and watch you crash and burn. And there will be a day when you will beg me to be on your side again. And I'll just laugh and laugh and laugh. It'll be great. Well, it'll be great for me. Probably won't be great for you, but it'll be very good for me. I remember Achilles already doesn't like Agamemnon with the whole like using him to murder his daughter thing 9 years beforehand, before they even left. So this is just like a continuation of a feud between the two men who just need to measure their dicks and get over it. So all of the people, all of the Greeks try to convince them to both change their minds, but it's pointless. I mean, we talked about the concept of hubris in the Oedipus episode, and again, like that's just what we're talking about and seeing here again, and this will not turn out very well for them. Eventually, we still have like 620 pages to go. So Agamemnon does a sacrifice, he gives back Chryseis, and Apollo ends the plague, and then Agamemnon orders his soldiers to go and take Briseis from Achilles, and if he doesn't give her to them willingly, then he will fucking regret it. At least that's what he says. And the men that Agamemnon sends are like, awesome, wonderful. Thank you so much for this honor of telling this to Achilles and being on the receiving end of his wrath while you, my dear king, just fucking chill in your tent. So they go to Achilles and he's like, hey fam, y'all are good. I don't have any problems with you. I know that you're just doing what you're told. But when you bring him my prize of war, I also give him this message: that I swear by the gods and men that I will not set foot on that fucking battlefield again for his sake. I'ma just chill here with my lover, friend, Patroclus. So Achilles is distraught after Briseis is taken from him. So he summons his mother and he fills her in on everything that happened. And then he asks her to go to Zeus and remind him of all the times that she helped him. Like that time when she saved his son, and that time that she saved his other son, and that time when Athena and Hera revolted against him and she set him free. You remember all the things that like they should have been grateful for before, but they just let her get raped. Now these things are important to the plot line of the story. So he asks his mother to go to Zeus, remind him of all of these things. And then when she has Zeus firmly in her grasp, to beg him to help the Trojans, to make sure that as many Greeks as possible die, and that Agamemnon and his army truly suffer. Let the men know how great Agamemnon is, and let Agamemnon come and regret dishonoring me. And he's like weeping as he's asking her to do this. So she takes pity on him. She feels really bad. She's like, my poor baby, my poor son, who is doomed to live such a short life. You're not coming home from Troy. We all know that. And now the rest of your days will be in sorrow. I will do anything you ask me to spare you an ounce of suffering. So she did this. And she told Zeus that if he respected her at all, that he would do this. And if he doesn't, it just shows how little he regards her. And Zeus sat for a long time in silence before he was finally like, you're asking me a big fucking favor, and you're gonna put me on the shit list with my wife because she's on the Greek side. And we literally just got in a fight this morning where she was saying I'm always on the Trojan side, and I told her that I wasn't, and now I have no choice because you put me in a real tough place. You're lucky I still think you're hot. I remember that you freed me from my family when they tried to usurp my reign. So now you have to go before Hera notices, and I swear that I will see this done for you. But Hera notices and immediately calls him out, and she guesses exactly what happened and exactly what Thetis asked him. And Zeus just gaslights her and is like, what? You are crazy. Like, you accuse me of these things that are so not true. And like, the only other thing that it does is make me resent you. So like, shut up or whatever. And it just so happens that is what happened. I do what I want. Okay. So later that night, he's trying to figure out the best way to approach the situation, and he decides that he would speak to Agamemnon in a dream that all the gods have decided that the Greeks will win with or without Achilles, and they have to immediately arm all of the men and attack Troy, and they will be victorious. So Agamemnon wakes up the next morning, he communicates this dream to all his men, and they prepare for battle. They sacrifice some cattle, they have a quick brekkie. There's also a lot of like back and forth politics that go on for far too long that I do not care to discuss. So the men enter the battlefield, and Athena fills their hearts with strength and desire for war and push away any thoughts of home. And then Homer goes on to name every single commander and where they're from and what their strengths are for 16 fucking pages. Again, I don't care to recite that, but if you want to read it, Stephen Mitchell's translation is really good. Long story short, there were a lot of really cool dudes who did really cool things and were really strong warriors. But true to his promise, not on the battlefield was Achilles. He was at his camp with his men. They were playing games, lounging around, doing whatever. So Zeus sent Iris, goddess of the rainbow, to warn the Trojans of the impending attack. So Hector, who was Priam's son, was a warrior. He was renowned just like Achilles. He was the best of the Trojans, and he gathered his troops who were eager for battle. Paris, his brother, who arguably started this whole thing, was at his side. One of the other commanders that is pretty important is a man named Aeneas, who was the son of Aphrodite and Anchises. There's also a whole list of Trojan commanders that goes on for 6 pages, which I will, again, not go over. These people are not important. Anyone who's important to the story, I will mention. These 6 and 16 pages are just lists and lists and lists of people that are like never mentioned, or are mentioned once when they're like killed by Ajax or something. So Paris steps on the field, and he's in a leopard skin, and he's got his bow and arrow, and he's got a sword, and he asks for the best and the bravest of the Greeks to step forward. And Menelaus is like, bitch, this is why I fucking came here. So he steps forward, and Paris is shitting himself because Menelaus is king of Sparta, where they value combat over everything, and he's scary as fuck, and he's fucking huge. And Paris recoils. He was terrified, and he shrinks back into the crowd, and Hector is like, dude, you started this fucking war and strut out onto the battlefield talking big game. Now that someone's taking you up in your challenge, you're going to run away. You are a fucking disgrace, and you are a selfish fool who only thinks with his dick. And I wish that you never saw Helen and got married to her. Or better yet, that you were just never born. You're fucking embarrassing me and the entirety of the Trojan army and our father and the city of Troy itself. The Greeks are probably laughing their asses off and mocking us. You are a coward. Do you only save your bravery for stealing men's wives in the middle of the night while they're out of town? And Paris is like, you are not wrong. But have you seen this guy? Okay, well, it was really nice knowing you, brother. So the two sides negotiate. Hector says that they don't want to shed innocent blood. And this is just between Paris and Menelaus. None of the other soldiers are going to get involved. This is going to be a fight to the death between the two of them, and the prize is Helen. Whoever the gods deem as the victor and rightful husband will win the duel and receive her and all of her possessions, and everyone can go home, and we'll all just be friends, and this doesn't have to devolve into war. It was a good plan, guys. It was a really good plan. But this is about the Trojan War. So Menelaus steps forward and is like, I feel the same way. There has been enough bloodshed already in the towns surrounding the city of Troy. We've been gone from our homelands for over 10 years, and this is just between me and Paris. I appreciate that everyone has come out and that all the Greeks have my back, but this isn't what I wanted. So let's make an oath that this is what we'll do. We'll sacrifice a couple lambs to Zeus, and we'll do this. But if we break this oath, war will ensue. And I wonder what happens. And the Trojans and Greeks are both really happy for this compromise. And while they're preparing the sacrifice and all that, the goddess Iris went to Helen and she disguised herself as Paris' sister. And Iris finds Helen rather distraught. She feels really guilty that this war has begun because of her. Arguably because of her. Arguably you could say it was because of Theseus, but we just try and blame everything on him in Effed Up History. So Iris is like, look, they're not fighting. Everyone's laying down their weapons and it's going to be just this fight. And then we'll know and everyone can go home and no one is going to ask what you want because you're just a woman and why should you decide if you want to be with Paris or Menelaus or just by yourself and tell everyone to fuck off. No, you are the prize. You are the object to be won. This fight is going to end and then you're going to be just given to whoever. And then Iris fills Helen with longing for her former husband and her home Sparta, which I'm assuming she did because it's pretty clear that Paris is like not gonna win. Have you seen this guy? And even the elders of Troy, including Priam, Paris's father, don't want Paris to win either because they want Helen to go back to Sparta. They view her as a curse on Troy. Although really, is it her fault or is it Paris's fault? Because there was the prophecy that Paris was the curse on Troy, but we're just going to blame the woman for everything, right? So Helen goes to the wall to watch this battle and Priam is like, it's okay. I don't blame this on you. I know that it was the gods doing. And Helen is pretty much suicidal at this point. She says that she wishes that she would have just died or that maybe if she still died, it would all end everything. And Priam basically tells her not to think about it. He asks her to tell him about the great warriors that are on the field like Agamemnon and Odysseus and Ajax. And then he goes down to complete the sacrifice and the duel begins. So they drew lots and Paris was the one who was to throw the first spear. So the men put on their armor. They went to the designated duel area and sort of like the no man's land between the two armies. Paris throws his spear and hits dead center on Menelaus' shield. And Menelaus prepared for his first attack and prayed to Zeus to help him execute his revenge on the man who came to him in friendship and stole his wife and lived as her husband for the last 10 years. And then he threw his spear. Spear went right through Paris's shield, his breastplate, and his tunic, and grazed under his ribs. It probably would have killed him if Paris hadn't moved slightly to the side when Menelaus threw it. So Menelaus takes his sword and he strikes Paris's helmet, and the sword shattered in his hand. He cries out to Zeus, "Truly, there is no god that is more spiteful than you. I thought you would at least let me have my revenge finally after 10 fucking years." And then he strides forward, enraged now, not only at Paris, but at the gods. And he grabs Paris by his helmet and starts dragging him towards the Greeks. And he's strangling him by the straps of his helmet. And he would have just killed him with his bare hands if it wasn't for Aphrodite, who intervenes and she cuts the straps. Menelaus realized there wasn't a person at the end of the helmet anymore, and he rolls around with his spear, ready to attack Paris, who now has a broken shield, a ruined breastplate, and no helmet, when Aphrodite again steps in. She whisks him away to his bedroom behind the gates of Troy, and then disguised herself and went and got Helen and was like, "Paris is waiting for you in your room and he doesn't look like he almost died at all. He's gorgeous and you should go reward him for being so gorgeous." And Helen just saw right through the disguise and was like, "Aphrodite, what the fuck do you want now? Are you here to take me to another beautiful man that you favor when Paris is dead? If you care so much about Paris and his well-being, then you go to him. Maybe he'll make you his wife, or maybe just his whore. I don't plan on going to him. I will not disgrace myself any more than I already have." And a reminder, she's been filled with longing for her first husband. But Aphrodite looks at her with a glare that instills fear in Helen's heart and tells her that she could easily despise her just as much as she adores her. And if her heart turns to hatred for Helen, that she will rejoice in the cruel death that would await her. So Helen went, but she was not in a good mood about it. She was like, "Paris, you're back. Wish you fucking weren't, because if I remember correctly, you talked a big talk about how you were so much better than my first husband, how you were stronger and better with a spear, and yet here you are. You should go back and fight him, although that might not be the best idea because he will kill you. And Paris is so offended. He's like, my love, please. Menelaus may have won this time, but it's because Athena was helping him clearly. But I will win the next one. But right now, this near-death experience is making me extremely horny, and I would like to do that now. And by that, I mean you, because I'm super smooth. So they get together in a marital way, while Menelaus is still in the field, just ripping his way through the Trojan soldiers, trying to find Paris. And he's screaming like a wild beast, and the Trojans are looking for him too, because they all hate him. And eventually, in an effort to calm his brother down, Agamemnon steps forward and announces, Menelaus has won! Through Paris' forfeit, and Helen must be returned to the Greeks, and they have won the war. Or have they? Because in Mount Olympus, all the gods are watching and drinking and laughing and laughing and laughing, and Zeus starts taunting Hera, saying you and Athena may be on the side of the Greeks, but Aphrodite is literally intervening and pulling people off the battlefield. Should we honor the oath that they just made, acknowledge Menelaus as a victor, and everyone goes home in friendship, or should we incite the war? And Athena couldn't take it anymore. She screamed at her father, what do you mean? Why would we incite war and make everything that I've done and everything that Hera has done be in vain? I know that you do what you want, but why would you be so cruel to me, your daughter? And Zeus asks her, like, what has Priam and Troy done to you to make you hate them so much and want to destroy Troy just for the hell of it? Like, we know that you and Hera hate Paris because he didn't pick you as the fairest, but why take it out on all of Troy? Even if you were to take down Troy, would that really make you feel better? Fine. You know what? I will give in. But the next time I have an urge to take down a city that is full of people you hold dear, you can't say or do shit. And Hera steps forward and is like, yeah, go for it. My favorite cities are Argos and Sparta and Mycenae. You can destroy them right now and I will not stop you. I couldn't stop you anyway because you're the strongest of us and that's why you need to help us. So please let Athena go into the battlefield and incite rage among the Trojans, make them break the truce, and give the Greeks cause to fight. And Zeus complies. And he allows Athena to go down. She flashes to earth like a falling star. Now this is just a lot of battle and politics amongst the gods for the next, 250 pages or so. So I'm going to summarize this as quick as possible and as least painful as possible because it's important to the story, things that happen now, but it's a lot of names and description of people that are mentioned here for the first time and for the last time, and I've never seen their names in mythology outside of this, and it's a lot. So warning, bear with me, I'm going to try and make this as fun as possible. So Athena falls into the Trojans and disguises herself as the captain named Antenor, and she goes up to a man named Pandarus, and she asks him if he thought that he could take Menelaus down with a single shot. He is really well known for his skill with the bow and arrow. And she's like, imagine the fame and the notoriety. I'm sure Paris will be so grateful to shower you with gifts. Do it. Do it. Don't worry about the truce. Just sacrifice 100 lambs to Apollo when you return home after the war. Do it. And he's like, cool. Yep, I will. That sounds great. And he pulls out his bow and the Trojans around him shield him so that no one could see what was happening. He knocks his arrow and vowed that he would sacrifice to Apollo and then loosed it. It flies across the field straight for Menelaus and it was about to find its mark when Athena steps up and brushes the arrow away like you would brush away a fly. She's literally just playing war with herself at this moment. It did hit him, but it wasn't a fatal blow, but it did break the truce. So spears clash against shields, armor rings out, mixing with the cries and groans of men killing and being killed, and the earth flows with blood. Lots of men were killed in battle, and it was fierce. Neither side gave way until Ulysses, who was dear to Odysseus, was killed. And Odysseus, enraged and heartbroken, strode through the ranks and just stood in front of the Trojans and stared them down, and he was so wild and terrifying that the Trojans began pulling back. And then they really started panicking when Athena infused Diomedes from Argos with her strength and bravery that literally caused him to glow with a bright light like the fucking fire. But that's probably not the only reason they were panicking a little bit. Remember when we talked about the 7 against Thebes in the Antigone episode, and I mentioned that there was one warrior who was super badass, and he was the fiercest warrior of the 7, who was favored by Athena, who Athena wanted to make immortal, until she looked on the battlefield and saw that he was channeling his inner George Romero and eating brains of one of the men he killed. Yeah, this is his son. And he looks like he's fucking on fire, the flaming son of a cannibal zombie dude. And the Trojans are brave enough to fight him, but none succeed. Pandarus, the same one who hit Menelaus with the arrow, hits Diomedes and thought that it did something, but it fucking didn't. I mean, it like harmed his shoulder a little bit, but that just sort of like pissed him off and got his adrenaline running even more than anything else. So Diomedes was like, Athena, if you've ever loved me or loved my father, grant me the power and serenity to kill the shit out of this fuckhead who thinks that he can step up to me. And Athena's like, baby doll, I will do one better. You are still glowing and looking like you're on fire. And now I'm also going to give you all the strength of your crazy ass father. And also, I'm going to remove the mist from your eyes so that you can discern who's a god and who's a mortal. So that way you know. And if any god approaches you and challenges you to a fight, then you refuse, because you might become too strong and they might try and take you down. Except if it is that fucking goddamn bitch Aphrodite, if she comes, you fuck her shit right up. And Diomedes is like, thank you! And then he kills Astinus and Abas and Polyidus and Xanthus and Thune, and like, you know who these people are. I don't know who these people are, and I'm obsessed with mythology. He kills a lot of fucking people. And the Iliad goes on to name every single one of them because Homer has never heard of a fucking editor. So after this very long list of murdered people is done, Aeneas, who I mentioned briefly is son of Aphrodite, finds Pandarus and was like, if you're so good with your fucking bow and arrow, then let's use it. And Pandarus is like, Aeneas, counselor, friend, I'm fucking trying! Like, he's glowing like an anthropomorphic flame. People don't just do that. He clearly has a god on his side that isn't letting me. I mean, I did hit his shoulder, but that clearly is not holding him back. And I was like, what chariot shall I use when he's destroyed fucking all of them? And I left my spare at home. I can fire a million arrows, and they're clearly not going to do anything because I've hit 2 of their best warriors, drawn blood, and they're still standing. So this bow, it's fucking useless. And Aeneas is like, just think positive, friend. Relax. Take a couple deep breaths. Maybe let's do like some meditation here for a moment. Breathe in and out. You can't see it, but my eye is twitching. So after he tells Pandarus to just like smile to get rid of his depression, Aeneas is like, I actually have a horse and chariot, conveniently plot device. So let's get on that and do this shit. Now, the horses that Aeneas says are not just any horses. They are the best horses, descended from the horses of King Tros, given to him by Zeus in exchange for his son, who became sex slave and cupbearer. Effed Up Mythology. So these horses ride like the wind, and Pandarus is like, it is me, the man who fired the arrow at you, Diomedes, like 15 minutes ago, and here I am to try and kill you again. And he hurls a spear at Diomedes, who just catches it in his shield. And Pandarus thinks that he hit him, and it's like, fuck yeah, got you in your fucking stomach. There's no saving you now. And Diomedes just like moves his shield to the side a little bit and is like, yeah, no, I'm cool, dude, but you're not about to be. Trigger warning, graphic ass shit coming up right now. So Diomedes throws his spear and he hits Pandarus on the nose near his eye, and it thrusts down and drove through his teeth and sliced off his tongue and came out of the bottom of his face, which is terrifying and quite jarring for me to read, considering that the last 100 pages leading up to this was basically semi-boring exposition, and he obviously died in a very horrific way that I think I literally had a nightmare about the other day. Aeneas jumps out of the chariot. He tries to grab Pandarus's body when Diomedes picks up a boulder that 3 men couldn't pick up by themselves. He holds it above his head and he throws it at Aeneas, which broke his pelvis and tore all of the tendons in his legs, which again is fucking terrifying. And Aeneas falls to the ground. Death is coming for him in the form of Diomedes when Aphrodite quickly descends onto the field and throws herself over herself son and whisks him away because she is a lover and not a fighter. But remember, Athena has allowed Diomedes to see the gods and told him that if he sees Aphrodite, he needs to try and kill her, even though she's immortal. So he's going after her hard, and he manages to catch up with her and stabs her. And it ends up like just stabbing her right above the wrist, but it makes her drop Aeneas. And he shouts at her basically, haven't you done enough? Why don't you just fuck right the fuck off, or I'll show you how terrifying war can actually be, goddess of fucking love. So she leaves and goes back to Mount Olympus, and Apollo helps her a little by hiding Aeneas in a shadow on the field. But Diomedes is still going after him. He can see right through the shadow that Apollo has put into place. And so he tries and tries and tries to kill him. And every time Apollo is like, no, go away, Diomedes. Like squirting him with a spray bottle and telling him he's a bad boy. And finally, on the fourth attempt, Apollo tells him to back the fuck up. And even though Athena is helping him, he needs to stop acting like he is a god. And then he just like removes Aeneas from the field entirely and brings him to his mother Leda and sister Artemis, who heals him. Diomedes is livid. So he goes and steals Aeneas' super cool horses. So at least he gets that out of the deal. The battle continues. Menelaus kills people. Aeneas kills people. Agamemnon kills people. Hector kills people. Everyone was kung fu fighting, okay, except for Achilles. He's twiddling his thumbs back at camp. So, there are lots of like murders and all of that happening. And Hector finally decides that now is the time. And he starts running towards the Greeks. And Ares is at his side. Diomedes can still see the god. And he starts telling everyone to back the fuck up. So Athena approaches Diomedes, who is taking a rest at this point after he retreats a little bit because of the wound that he got from Pandarus. It's like actually starting to be really taxing, and his armor is like rubbing against it every time he lifts his shield, and he feels it. And Athena comes over and kind of like emasculates him because she's a big supporter of toxic masculinity, and basically tells him that he's being a big coward and his father never would have let a little wound like this affect him, and maybe he isn't worthy of his father. And Diomedes is like, lady, I'm fucking doing what you told me to do. I'm not being a coward or letting my injury get to me. You told me not to attack any god other than Aphrodite, and Ares is getting in the way. And Athena is like, oh, don't worry, I will take care of Ares. And she jumps in his chariot with him. She takes the reins and heads straight for Ares. She was somehow able to get possession of Hades' helmet that makes the wearer invisible even to the gods. So now she's invisible, and she guides Diomedes' spear straight into Ares' stomach, and his roar, which is as loud as 10,000 men, stopped the Trojans and Greeks in their track. He leaves the field and is healed on Mount Olympus and does not come back to the battlefield. And Hector leaves the battlefield as well to go find his bullshit brother Paris, who we haven't seen since he was whisked off the field. So he finds him sulking in his room, and Hector was like, hey, sorry to bother you. In case you didn't notice, there's a war going on, and people are fucking dying, and this is literally all your fault. So get your fucking ass out there. Get down there immediately, or I'll fucking kill you myself with my giant 6-foot spear that I happen to be carrying. And Paris tells Hector that he wasn't sulking, he was grief-stricken over losing the battle, but Helen was just pestering him and convincing him to go back, so he was getting his armor ready. And after a quick kiss to the wives, they make their way back out to the field. In the meantime, Diomedes entered the sort of like no man's land between the two armies, and another man also steps forward, and Diomedes was like, who are you? I've never seen you before. Are you a god? Let me go on to talk about the mythology of Lycurgus for 2 pages for some reason, even though we literally are at war right now. And this random man responded, why do you ask? Well, if you insist, I mean, most people know who I am, but you clearly don't, so let me divulge into 6 pages about the mythology of Sisyphus and Bellerophon and King Proteus and his wife Antea and all of Bellerophon's children and their children, which I am one of. My name is Glaucus. And Diomedes throws his spear and is like, hell yeah! My grandfather and your grandfather were friends sitting by the fire. My grandma says to your grandma, we're going to set this house on fire. Talking about, sorry. And because my grandfather and your grandfather were friends, that makes us friends. Come to my home in Argos and I'll welcome you. And then you'll do the same when I come to Lycia. And the 2 men swear not to kill each other and exchange armor with each other for some fucking reason. And there is still a war going on. Like, what the hell is happening? So Paris and Hector and Glaucus are just like killing the fuck out of Greeks, so much so that Athena sweeps down to try and step in yet again. And Apollo cuts her off and is like, seriously, can you stop just fucking intervening for one day? Can we do something to end the battle today and they can take it back up tomorrow? Can we just let Troy stand for one more night, please? How about we have Hector challenge someone to single combat and that will be the end of it. So the Trojans and the Greeks just sat there where they were in the field, and Hector asks the Greek to step forward, and after some convincing and drawing of straws, Ajax the Greater stands forward. He was excited. He was like, it is time. I'm going to kill this motherfucker Hector. And he stalks towards Hector and he's like, everyone talks about Achilles as the greatest warrior of all time. But there are Greek warriors that are just as strong and just as brave who can stand up against you. I'll even let you take the first shot, Hector. So Hector throws the first spear and misses. Ajax throws his spear and hit Hector, but just like with Paris, Hector moved at the last moment, so pretty much just grazes him, and the battle continues. Hector throws a spear. Ajax throws a spear. Hector throws a big stone. Ajax throws a big stone. It's just like a violent tennis match. And eventually some men from both sides were like, clearly, y'all are equally matched. Clearly, the gods aren't going to let each of you win, and night is descending. And there are no streetlights in ancient Troy, you know. And the two warriors agree and exchange gifts and go home. Although there was a little bit of a disagreement over what those gifts should have been, because technically Paris forfeited, which means technically they should be given Helen. And Paris stands up and is like, I don't give a shit what you're saying or what you think. I absolutely fucking refuse to give her back over my dead body, probably literally, because have you seen Menelaus? But I am willing to give back all the stuff that she brought with her and the things that I stole from Argos on my way back to Troy, and I'll even throw in some extra stuff to appease them. How many cloaks and swords is a woman worth? Any advice? Are there any ancient Trojan accountants around here? So the next morning, a messenger from Troy goes and tells Menelaus and Agamemnon what Paris has said and asks if they would be willing to stop fighting long enough to gather their dead and perform the funerary rites. And they made sure to tell them that they thought that Paris was a piece of shit, and they wholeheartedly disagreed with what he was doing, but they asked if the items that he offered would be enough to stop the war. Would be enough to stop the war. And Diomedes stood up and was like, no! And everyone agreed. And while the Trojans were gathering their dead, the Greeks began to build a wall. Troy Part 4. Oh, my dear Patroclus, what have you done? So picking up right where we left off, the next morning Zeus calls in all of the gods and goddesses and is like, I am fucking tired of this. It's been years and I'm ready for it to be done. Same, Zeus. We actually agree on something. What is happening? So he continues, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do, and you are going to agree that you are not going to step in and help the Trojans or the Greeks, and anyone who does, I will blast with my fucking lightning spear and then hurl you into underworld where you'll suffer for all of eternity, and not just the underworld, but the deepest level, so deep that where Hades is will seem as far away from you as the sky is from the ground, because some of you seem to have forgotten that I am in fucking charge, and I would love for one of you to fucking try me right now. And Athena's like, we all know how powerful you are, but some of us feel really bad for the Greeks, and they don't want to watch them all die because that's something that they had no control over. So like, yeah, I'll stay out of the fighting if you want me to, but I'm not going to stop going down there and giving them advice to keep them alive. And Zeus is like, oh, baby, don't worry. I didn't mean that. You can do whatever you want. Okay, Zeus, you're so scary. I'm so intimidated. Like I was there for a second. But not anymore. So the Greeks and the Trojans start fighting again, and Zeus is watching from Mount Ida, separate from the other Greek deities. So he takes out a scale, and on it he puts 2 portions of death. And one is for the Greeks and one is for the Trojans. And the Greek side is heavier So he starts hurling down lightning bolts into the Greeks, which makes them start to retreat. Except for fucking Diomedes, because of course it's Diomedes. So he notices that Nestor is on a chariot and that one of his horses has been killed, and he's struggling to try and cut it so he can flee. And while he's distracted with that, Hector is just coming right towards him. So Diomedes is like, Nestor, you're old. Your horses are old. Let's get on this chariot that's pulled by those super cool horses that I stole from Aeneas, and we'll ride straight into the Trojans, and Hector can fucking see how fierce we are. Let us ignore the fact that Zeus just threw a fucking lightning bolt into our midst, and we're completely alone on the battlefield now because everyone else has fled. So Diomedes and Nestor do just that. They ride into the Trojan forces, and Diomedes throws a spear at Hector in his chariot, and he misses, and is about to throw another when Zeus notices and fires yet another bolt of lightning in front of Diomedes. And Nestor's like, yeah, we need to turn back. Clearly Zeus has decided that Hector is going to win today. And Diomedes is like, you are probably right, but one day Hector is going to be telling the story of today, and he's going to boast about how when I saw him, I ran away, and I can't have that. And Nestor's like, shut the fuck up. We're leaving. And then they start fleeing. Hector calls after them and is like, I thought Diomedes was strong and brave, but clearly he's just a coward. And then he turns to his troops and is like, let's go get them. If we're able to capture Diomedes and Nestor, then maybe we can make the Greeks leave tonight. And Hera hears this and is pissed and turns to Poseidon and was like, are you really just going to allow this to happen? And he was like, yeah. So she goes down and influences Agamemnon to give this grand speech. And by grand speech, I mean insulting and emasculating the soldiers and feeding into toxic masculinity that no man deserves. Like, I talk a lot of shit and like jokingly crap on men all the time in this podcast, but I really like and support a lot of men who aren't shit. Like 99% of men are not shit, but like regardless, even that 1% that are shit do not deserve to be treated the way that Agamemnon treats his soldiers. His soldiers. And while he's insulting all of his men, he's crying hysterically. You know what? It is completely fine for a man to be in touch with his emotions, just not fine for him to be a dick. So Zeus sees this, and he pities Agamemnon, and is like, I know that I just shot a lightning bolt down at the entirety of the Greek forces and made them flee and lose the battle, but I'll send an eagle down now. And in the eagle's talon is a fawn, and it's going to drop the fawn at my altar. And then that way the Greeks will know that I actually want them to win. And the Greeks see this, and they run back out against the Trojans to fight again with Diomedes at the front. But Zeus wasn't just going to let them win. No, I mean, like, eventually. Like, the fawn thing means, like, eventually they're going to win. But, like, not today. Like, today, there's no intentions of letting the Greeks win. So this time, Hera turns to Athena and is like, are you going to do anything to help the Greeks? And Athena is like, no. So back in battle, the Trojans have decided that they're going to intimidate the Greeks by lighting a bunch of fires so the Greeks can attack in the night, and also an added bonus of making them think that the Trojans are planning on burning all their ships down. So on the Greek side, Agamemnon has gathered all the men, and he's basically like, I have been betrayed by Zeus. He once told me that I would win the battle against Troy and bring home shiploads of riches, and I see that I was tricked and that we shouldn't trust the gods. So pack up, friends. Too many people have died, and I don't see this ending anytime soon, and I think it's just time for us to go home. And everyone just stands there speechless for a while. And then Diomedes stands up because of course it's fucking Diomedes. And he's like, you can go wherever the fuck you want, but I'm staying right here. And honestly, I just can't wait for someone to kill Diomedes. And for some reason I had it in my head that like Hector and him fight and like Hector kills him, but he doesn't. In fact, no one kills Diomedes in the Trojan War, which means I have to put up with him for another, like, 400 fucking pages. Sorry for the spoiler, I guess, but if I have to suffer, then so do you. I'm becoming completely unhinged. So Nestor stands up and says, Most glorious son of Atreus, Agamemnon, with you my speech will begin, and with you it will end, since you are king over many, and Zeus has bestowed the scepter on you and the long-established traditions, so that the people may profit from your sound judgment. You, more than anyone here, must not only speak well, but listen well and act when another man's heart prompts him to give advice for the good of us all. The words may be his, but the credit will go to you. Now I will speak out and tell you what I think is best. No one will put forth a better idea than this one, which I have long had in mind. And like, can he just fucking come out with it already? Zeus, the thunderer, supreme god and ruler of Olympus, I fucking swear, like, I know that it is super old and classic, and like my undergrad was literary studies, which is a very fancy way to say English major, and I specialized in Shakespeare, who is notoriously convoluted and is known for dancing around the point. I literally wrote a 20-page paper on the supernatural in Hamlet and Macbeth and spent an entire semester just analyzing every single line of those two plays, and I'm still pulling my fucking hair out reading the fucking Iliad in this point. Anyway, after all of that long speech where Nestor says fucking nothing, he literally just tells Agamemnon to try and make amends with Achilles. Fucking duh. And Agamemnon is also like, fucking duh. Okay, I will give him back Briseis and 7 more girls, because women can be given as gifts, along with my oath that I did not rape Briseis. Although the translation says that he did not make love to her, which, like, we all know there would be nothing consensual about that. So way to minimize what's actually going on in the Greek camps. What a guy. He's also going to give him gold and weapons and cauldrons and horses. And if they win against Priam, he can have whatever he wants. Plus 20 Trojan women, and I'll even let him marry one of my daughters. In fact, I will pay him a handsome dowry, more than any man could dream of, to marry one of my daughters. And it is not the point of this right now, but that is 29 women that Agamemnon is offering to just like give Achilles. Like, what the fuck is he going to do with 29 women? Agamemnon also said that he would give Achilles 7 cities. So I guess like Achilles will take his 7 cities and he'll put 1 woman in the north and 1 in the south and 1 in the east and 1 in the west of his 7 cities, and then like still have 1 to spare in case anything happens to one of them. So they go to bargain with Achilles, and he's just like fucking lounging, singing, and playing on the lyre with Patroclus, while all of the other Greeks are dropping dead left and right on the battlefield. And he's like, "Sup, guys? Odysseus, good to see you, man. You're always my favorite. Here's some wine and here's some food. What's going on?" Oh, Agamemnon's gonna give me all that. Let me think. No, actually, I think I'm just going to get on my boat and leave. And you can tell Agamemnon exactly that, because he doesn't have the balls to come and say it to my face. And since those who are beneath him, or at least what he considers beneath him, to do his dirty work, he could offer me 20 times what he has, and the answer would still be no. So that is 580 women. Sorry, I'm fixating on that. Like, Achilles also, during this speech to Odysseus and the other men that come to him, call Briseis his darling wife, which again, I mean, she was taken as prisoner and given as a prize, so like, minimizing this for what it actually is. So the next morning, Zeus still has it out for the Greeks, and he sends strife into the Greek camp. In this case, it is the goddess Eris, who I fucking love her. If you forgot, she's the one who started this whole thing because she wasn't invited to a party. She just comes and like stands in the middle of everyone and screams, which, like, I've been there, girl. Sometimes a feral scream is like the only answer to make you feel better. She makes all of them want to fight and not go home, and Eris just looks on with joy because she is a mood. Agamemnon kills a lot of people. Most of them aren't important. Honestly, the only one that's mentioned previously that might be somewhat important is Antiphus, and he's just mentioned because he's one of Priam's sons. So Zeus intercedes, and he has Iris relay this message to Hector to stay away from Agamemnon until he is injured. Once a spear or arrow hits Agamemnon, Hector will be free to attack. So it's super nice that Zeus is allowing them to take turns, you know? So after many people tried and failed to kill Agamemnon, there was finally one man named Kuun, who stabs him below the elbow on his forearm. And apparently, the pain from this stab was worse than a woman feels when she is in labor. Sure. Super believable that a knife wound to your arm. Poor guy. Also, this story was written by a man. So, but Agamemnon was hurt. So now it is time for Hector to fight. And Hector gets immediately knocked unconscious when Diomedes throws a spear at him and it crashes into his helmet. So while Hector is laying there, having a little nap, Paris finally makes himself useful and fucking does something, and in a way that is not at all foreshadowing, Paris fires an arrow at Diomedes and it goes through the instep of his foot and lodges him into the ground. But his injury didn't stop Diomedes from shit-talking Paris. He calls him a weakling and a girl-crazed seducer and a perfumed sissy and challenges him to hand-to-hand combat instead of hiding behind his cowardly arrows. Then he's like, I know you literally shot me through my foot, but this doesn't even hurt. It would hurt more if a child hit me. When I hit someone, they just fucking die. And then he like pulls the arrow out of his foot and he flees back to the Greek camps because he was actually in too much agony. But like, do I actually like Diomedes? I haven't decided. So Diomedes is now injured. Agamemnon is injured. Odysseus gets surrounded by Trojans and is also injured. And Hector comes to and charges at Ajax the Great, who retreats. And Achilles is watching the entire thing from his ship and turned to his dear companion Patroclus and said, Patroclus, joy of my heart, now the Greeks will have to ask me to fight for them. But it looks like they carried someone off the field and it looks like it might be the healer Machaon. Go check and see for me. So he does, but I feel really bad for Patroclus because even with them being so close, Patroclus is terrified of Achilles and his rage. He's like, hey, guys, I'm here. I have a couple questions to ask, but I can't sit down and talk for long because Achilles might get upset if I linger, and you know how terrifying he can be. And Nestor is like, why is he concerned now? When did he start giving a fuck? Yeah, Machaon is injured. He was shot with an arrow. So was Diomedes. And Odysseus and Agamemnon were fucking stabbed. Is he just going to wait until we're all dead and all of the ships are on fire? And then he goes on this long anecdote about a battle that happened when he was young, not respecting at all what Patroclus said about the whole, like, can't be here for too long thing. Moral of the story of this big long rant that Nestor goes on is that he fought for others even when he didn't want to and received glory, whereas Achilles only fights for himself and he'll come to regret it when everyone that he cares about has died. Then he tells Patroclus that while Achilles is stronger and braver, Patroclus is older, so Achilles might respect him and listen to what he has to say. The Greeks have lost hope. They're dying. There seems to be no hope of ever returning home, or at this point, even seeing the sun tomorrow. The Trojans are getting too cocky without him on the field. We need Achilles, and if Achilles doesn't want to fight, then we can respect that. But maybe we can make the men think that he's on the field. If he were to, say, give someone his armor, someone that he loved and respected, that knew him well, and could lead his men and perhaps walk like him, perhaps fight like him. If he were to give you his armor, Patroclus, you could be the hero of the war. And as Patroclus is making his way back to Achilles' ship after having this conversation, the Trojans make their way closer and closer to the Greek camps and attempt to break down the wall that they built. And after some fighting, Hector throws a boulder and shatters the gate. The Greeks all flee back to their ships as the Trojans make their way into the Greek camp, and they're heading straight for the ships. The Greeks have now completely lost hope, and Poseidon comes down and he fills them with strength and courage, but it's not enough. And while he's doing this, Zeus is not paying attention, and Hera is watching and is super annoyed that Zeus is just looking the other way and letting everyone fight and not seeing that Poseidon has stepped in, and that's when she gets an idea. So Zeus is known for his just constant erections and how he's constantly in the mood. So she decides that she's going to seduce him. She's going to make herself so unbelievably alluring that he would become overwhelmed with desire, and then she'll drug him. I just can't, man. Like, even the female characters are garbage. So she went to her room and bathed herself in ambrosia and then rubbed perfume all over herself and combed and braided her hair until it glistened. And then she put on a dress that Athena made for her. She put on earrings and sexy fuck me heels. And then she found Aphrodite and asked Aphrodite if she could give her love and desire. Hera lied and said that she was going to see Oceanus and his wife / sister Tethys, and that she's going to give them some of this love and desire because they've been fighting and just need to have makeup sex already. And Aphrodite was like, of course, here, take my shawl that has the tassels of love and desire and flirtations and whispered endearments and seduction that literally holds all of my magic. And then Hera went to the god of sleep and tells him that he needs to make Zeus pass the fuck out after they're done having sex. And then if he does that for her, she'll have her son Hephaestus make him a golden throne. And Sleep is like, no, you made me do that before when Heracles was performing his 12 labors and Zeus nearly fucking killed me. There's literally nothing you can say that would make me do this. And Hera is like, I will give you one of the graces to marry. And Sleep is like, sold. Specifically, I want Pasithea. And Hera's like, I don't give a shit, whatever you want, dude. So Hera and Sleep make their way to Mount Ida, where Zeus is residing, so that he can just like fucking get away from all of the other Olympians. And Sleep sort of like makes himself invisible, so Zeus just sees her and is like, ugh, what the fuck are you doing? What are you wearing? Whatever it is that you're wearing, it will look better on the floor. And then he attempts to seduce her back by saying, quote, let us go to bed and be joined in pleasure. Never before has desire for goddess or woman so inundated my heart and so overpowered it. This is good, super nice and complimentary. And then he continues, quote, not even when I was in love with Ixion's wife who bore me Perithous, or with Acrisius' daughter Danae, that girl with the lovely ankles who bore me Perseus, or with the daughter of Phoenix, Europa, who bore me Minos and Rhadamanthus, or with Semele or Alcmena in Thebes, who was the mother of Heracles, whereas the other gave birth to Dionysus, the joy of mankind, or with Demeter, or Leto, or even yourself, than now, when this sweet desire has overwhelmed me. So take some advice from Zeus. When you are trying to seduce your spouse or your partner, mention all the many people that you've cheated on them with, and make them extra horny by also mentioning the children that you had with them and mostly abandoned until they became adults and heroes, and then you can take credit that these are all your children, like you had something to do with it and their upbringing. So Hera plays along with it, and she's like, what? Here? Someone might see us. Don't pay attention to Sleep pretending to be invisible in the corner. If you want to have sex, let's go back to Mount Olympus and do it in privacy. And Zeus is like, Hera, baby, we can do it here. I'll cover us with a golden cloud that not even Helios the sun could see through. And as he took her into his arms, spring flowers erupted from the earth, lifting them off the ground, and Zeus surrounded them in a golden cloud. And once they finished, Sleep carried out his promise and put Zeus into a deep sleep, and then ran down to the battlefield and told Poseidon to take this opportunity to help the Greeks as much as possible. So Poseidon leads the Greeks into battle and imbues them with so much power that Ajax the Greater is able to wound Hector so badly that he has to be carried off the field. And without Hector there to lead them, the Trojans are just decimated. After a while, Zeus wakes up and sees what happened while he was essentially drugged. And Hera tries to say that it was all Poseidon's fault. And I had nothing to do with it. And Zeus is like, dude, I literally don't care. I honestly have no personal investment in this. The only reason why I'm doing anything for the Trojans is because I promised Thetis. And Achilles is going to be coming back to the battle really soon. Hector will die, Troy will fall, the Greeks will win. But until then, I need you and anyone else who is trying to intervene to help the Greeks to back off. So Poseidon leaves the field and Hector advances and gets far enough into the Greek camp to touch a ship. So Patroclus is watching all this happen and he's crying hysterically as the first ship bursts into flames. Now he understands why Achilles is being so stubborn about this feud with Agamemnon, but how many more Greeks will have to die for his stubbornness? He tells Achilles that he is impossible to deal with, that he can't be son of Peleus and Thetis because he has no heart and he has no pity. His parents must have been the pitiless ocean and the harsh cliffs. But I will not ask you to put your pride aside. I know that it is important to you, but you can allow me to put on your armor. And I'll take our men onto the field. The Trojans will think that I'm you, and I'll drive them back to the gates of Troy. Achilles agrees. He's like, I can't be mad forever, but I'm not ready to go back. So I agree to your plan, because if the Trojans make it to the ships and burn them, then we'll never be able to go home. But just get them away from our ships. Even if Zeus puts the biggest triumph in front of you, do not push farther than that. Not only do I not want you to take my glory, but if you're successful enough, a god might descend onto the field and enter battle against you. Aphrodite loves Troy. Apollo loves Troy. So go and drive them away from the ships, and then come back to me immediately. You mean more to me than anyone else, and I would see every single Trojan and every single Greek dead if it means that you and I are the only ones to survive. Achilles goes and gathers his 2,500 men that have been just chilling on the beach, and Patroclus puts on his armor and leads them onto the field. Achilles prays to Zeus to have his comrade Patroclus, who is more dear to him than anyone and anything else in the world, return to him, and for the ships not to be burned in the process so that they can return home together. And as Achilles watches them run off to battle, Zeus hears his prayer, but only will grant him half. Nestor's and Patroclus's plan works. The Trojans see Patroclus and are immediately taken with fear, thinking that it's Achilles, and they start retreating when Patroclus throws spear after spear into the midst, killing many Trojans. They put out the fire that was burning through the ship, and the Trojans retreat, thinking again that this is Achilles. And he's done what he promised he would do, has driven the Trojans back. He put out the fire, he stopped more ships from being burned, and now it should be time for him to turn back. But the sight of the retreating Trojans gave him courage and bravado, and he was full of anger, and he wanted revenge, and he drove on. Zeus has apparently decided to finally start supporting the Greeks, and he sends a terrible storm into the Trojan camp, which makes them run even faster. And still Patroclus is pushing on, slaughtering Trojan, getting revenge for all the fallen Greeks. But then he makes a mistake. He kills the wrong man. So a Trojan named Sarpedon, who was son of Zeus, saw everything that was happening and decided that he would face this man head on. And he leaps down from his chariot in full armor. Patroclus sees him and does the same. And as they're fighting, Zeus is watching from Mount Ida, and he turns to Hera and he's like, my son is about to die and I can't bear to watch. Should I go down there and snatch him from battle like how Aphrodite snatched Paris and Aeneas? And Hera was like, I mean, you do what you want. But you said you didn't want us interfering, and you're going to go intervene. You can go for it if you want, but just know that other gods and goddesses will do the same for their children or people that they hold dear if you do so. And so Zeus watches as Patroclus drives a spear into Sarpedon's heart, and he swears his revenge. Now, the events that follow are essentially everybody fighting over Sarpedon's body. The Trojans were trying to get it back so they can give it the proper burial rites. The Greeks are trying to strip him of his armor to dishonor him and basically like desecrate his corpse out of revenge. Some of the Greeks try to shit talk the Trojans, but Patroclus turns and tells them that this is not the time or the place. We should use actions and not our words. And when we talk shit, it distracts us and takes away from the attack. And then Zeus puts fear into Hector's heart and makes him retreat back to the gates of Troy. And Patroclus should also retreat. He should listen to what people are saying. He should keep his word to Achilles that he would save the ships and renew the strength of the Greeks, but instead tells his men to take Sarpedon's armor, and he follows Hector. And he makes it to the gates of Troy. And it is in his grasp to win, to breach the gates and take the city, to end the war with a single strike. But Apollo, who supports the Trojans, prevents him. 3 times Patroclus attempts to climb the walls, and 3 times Apollo throws him down, and Patroclus is getting pissed, and he attacks the gates with the frenzy, and Apollo shouts down to him that he needs to go back, that it isn't fated for Troy to fall to him, and he steps back to avoid Apollo's wrath, but the wrath is already there. Apollo disguises himself as Hector's uncle and then calls Hector a coward and asks him why he stopped fighting. And he tells him to drive the chariot straight at this man who looks like Achilles and walks like Achilles and fights like Achilles. This man who, as far as anyone is concerned, is Achilles. So Hector gets into his chariot. He hands his reins to his half-brother Cebriones so that he can focus on his spear. Patroclus jumps down as well, a spear in his left hand, and in his right hand he picks up a boulder. And with all of his strength he throws it at Hector, but it doesn't hit Hector, it hits his brother, killing him instantly. And then he doesn't take his own advice from earlier and he starts shit talking Hector. He's like, wow, what a fucking acrobat you are. No, not an acrobat. You must be an oyster fisher. You must be the best oyster fisher. You must be able to feed all of the cities surrounding Troy with how good of a diver you are. Here, let me throw more shit at you so I can see how well you dive out of the way of those. Or, how about I fucking race you? And Patroclus books it for Cebriones to steal his armor and do whatever else, just as Hector runs towards his brother as well. And they're literally like fighting over this body. Hector grabs his head, Patroclus grabs his foot, and they're playing corpse tug of war. And the Greeks end up being stronger. They drag his body away. But again, Patroclus, who should have turned back a long time ago, charges at the Trojans with murder in his heart. He charges at them 3 times, and each time he kills 9 men. And then Apollo steps in. Patroclus didn't see him coming. Apollo had covered himself with a mist, and as Patroclus went to attack for the 4th time, Apollo hit him hard between his shoulders. Patroclus whirls around and comes face to face with the god, who then knocks off his helmet. Achilles' helmet had never been knocked off. The warrior was too loved by the gods to ever put his head or his face at risk, but this was not Achilles. Achilles was still on his boat, waiting for the return of his dear friend who was supposed to drive the Trojans away from the boats and come right back. No, this was not Achilles. This was Patroclus. Then Apollo shattered the spear that Patroclus held. He broke the strap that held his shield to him, and he unbuckled his breastplate. And as it fell to the ground, Patroclus's legs went limp, and he stood in a daze as a Trojan drove a spear into his back. This didn't kill him, though, because Patroclus was destined to be killed by one person specifically: Hector. Hector saw Patroclus, realized it wasn't Achilles, and that he was injured and trying to retreat back to the Greek camp, so he charged and he stabbed him. And as Patroclus is dying, Hector mocks him. Patroclus looks up at Hector and tells him to boast while he can, because Achilles is coming for him. Menelaus sees Patroclus fall from the other side of the battlefield, and he fights his way over to his body, and he stands over it, fighting anyone off who's trying to come for him, because they are trying to come for him. Some of the Trojans want to take Patroclus' body so that they can try and bargain to get Sarpedon's body back, but they aren't successful until Hector charges. Menelaus stands his ground for as long as possible, but he knows that Hector is being helped by the gods. I mean, clearly, seeing how Patroclus died. Menelaus knows how important Patroclus is to Achilles, and he honestly doesn't really have a vendetta against Achilles, and he respects Patroclus for coming onto the field and giving the Greeks courage and trying to take Troy and end the war, and they can't leave him there, so he's going through the Greek troops looking for someone who can help him, and he finds Ajax the Great. He tells him what happened. They immediately go back for him, and when they get back to him, Hector is stripping off Achilles' armor and putting it on, advertising his victory over Patroclus, and he's in the process of dragging Hector's body away. He says he wants to cut off Patroclus's head and impale it on the gates of Troy and feed the body to the wild dogs, which would not only mean that he is desecrating his corpse, but he's going to prevent him from having the proper burial rites and going to the underworld. It's damning him to suffer for all of eternity. It is the biggest insult that you can do to someone. But he didn't do that because Ajax and Menelaus arrived and defend his body like, quote, a lioness defends her cubs. The fighting continues big time. The fighting over Patroclus's corpse is insane to me. On the Trojan side, they're trying to hurt Achilles as much as possible. They know that the Greeks can't win without Achilles, and if he's so overcome with grief, he won't be able to fight. The Greeks are trying to get Patroclus's body back for Achilles, but also for Patroclus. Everyone loves him. They regard him as the best among the Greeks, or the best fighter amongst the Greeks. Even Achilles' horses are crying over his death. Even Zeus pities them and the Greeks and allows Athena to go to the field to give strength to Menelaus and the Greeks. They send a man named Antilochus, who is Nestor's son, to let Achilles know what happened to his most beloved friend Patroclus. Antilochus can't even speak. He's so beside himself with grief, and he runs back to the Greek camp, crying hysterically as Menelaus and the Ajaxes and a bunch of other men are focused completely on defending Patroclus, and they're finally able to push the Trojans back enough to start bringing his body back. And the Trojans are outraged and start trying to rush at them, but every time they do, all Ajax the Great has to do is look at them, and they are so terrified by his fury and his grief that they retreat. Troy Part 5. Oh, he really dragged him. So, Patroclus is dead, and I'll have you know that I only cried for like 30 minutes about it, okay? So, Antilochus has reached Achilles, and he's basically already guessed what happened. And when it's confirmed, Achilles covers himself with soot and lets out a scream that's so loud and so gut-wrenching that his mother Thetis hears it on the other side of the world. And she knows that with that cry, he's never going to come home, and the rest of his short life will consist only of suffering. So she goes to him and she asks him what's wrong and tells him that Zeus has done exactly as he asked, and he's caused the Greeks to suffer, and yet Achilles weeps. And Achilles tells her that, yes, he's thankful that Zeus did what he asked, but what good is all of that now that Patroclus has been killed? The man that I honored and loved more than myself and anything in my life. And that is a quote for people who still like to say that Achilles and Patroclus were just friends. He then basically says that the only thing that he cares about now is taking revenge on Hector, and Thetis reveals that there is a prophecy that says that Achilles will die as soon after Hector does. And Achilles apologizes to his mother for her impending grief because he now just welcomes death. He let his beloved friend die when he could have saved him, and he blames himself, and he never wants to return to Phthia because Patroclus cannot return to his home country, and he will make every single Trojan weep so that they may know a fraction of his pain. Thetis doesn't argue with him, but reasons that he doesn't have any armor anymore since Hector stole it off of Patroclus. So she asks him just to wait one day so she can have new armor made for him. And the Greeks and Trojans are still fighting over Patroclus's corpse, literally playing tug of war, when Hera sends Iris, one of the messenger gods, down to Achilles and tells him to go and get Patroclus's body. He's like, but I don't have any armor. And she's like, you won't fucking need it. So he steps out to the trench. He doesn't even go on to the battlefield, and he lets out his war cry. And this fills the Trojans with such terror that they flee. And Patroclus was finally able to be brought behind the Greek lines. The Greeks grieve for him all night. Most of all was Achilles. It's described as ceaseless moans like a great bearded lioness whose cubs have been stolen by a man out hunting. Achilles cleans Patroclus's wounds, but he vows that he will not complete the funeral rites until he can bring the head and armor of Hector to him. He doesn't sleep at all, and the next morning Achilles' mother brings him his new armor. It's gorgeous. It was made by Hephaestus, who was the god of the forge, the god of the smith, and the shield is decorated with the earth and the sky and the seas and the tireless sun and moon and the constellations, and a meadow full of sleep and shepherds, and 2 cities alive with people. In one city there were weddings and feasts and young men dancing and 2 men fighting for honor while people were cheering them on. And in the other city there were 2 armies camped in their armor and planning for their attack. When Thetis comes and brings it to him, Achilles is laying face down. He's cuddling with Patroclus's corpse, and I wonder if he kept thinking about those last words that they spoke to each other when Patroclus told him that he was unfeeling and impossible to deal with. Because if those were the last words that I spoke to my partner, I would never be able to forgive myself. And even if you want to hetero wash the relationship, if that was the last conversation that I had with my friend, it would still kill me inside. So Achilles is crying hysterically when Thetis arrives, and she has to literally pull him off of Patroclus. She tells him that he has to leave him there and that it was the will of the gods that he died. And he finally looks at this beautiful armor and becomes more and more just filled with rage. But he doesn't want to leave Patroclus' side because he doesn't want his body to be attacked by bugs and the buzzards and any other animals that might be around. So Thetis assures him that she won't let that happen, that she'll look after his remains so that Achilles can focus on the fight at hand. So Achilles calls all the Greeks to assemble before him, and he's like, Agamemnon, this whole fight that we had between us was stupid. I don't even really care that much about Briseis anyway, honestly. I wish like Artemis would have just fired an arrow at her and killed her the day that I took her. So again, it wasn't her that he was upset about. It was the principle that his prize was stolen. So he probably would have gotten just as angry if it was like a sword or a shield that was taken from him by Agamemnon. Then Achilles is like, only the Trojans have profited from my anger. But like, isn't that what he asked his mother to ask Zeus to do? Like, are we leaving that part out when talking to the head of the army because that would be treason? And then he finishes his speech by saying that he's going to put his anger aside now and kill as many fucking Trojans as he can, namely that bitch Hector. And the crowd cheers, and Agamemnon is like, how is a man supposed to think when y'all are screaming? Shut up and listen and learn how a man speaks. And he's like, I know that you're all mad at me and have been blaming me for Achilles not fighting. But it isn't my fault. It's Zeus and then the Furies and fate. Nothing is my fault. I take no responsibility for my actions. In fact, I'm going to tell a long, drawn-out story about the day that Heracles was born and liken myself to Zeus when he was betrayed by his wife Hera, because bitches be crazy. But I am willing to make amends, and I'll give you all the things that Odysseus offered you before that you refused. Do you want them now or like later after you go out onto the battlefield with all intentions of dying? Like, I'm flexible. And Achilles is like, I literally don't give a fuck. You can do whatever you want with them. Let's just go fight already. And Odysseus is like, can we like have breakfast first so we don't all collapse from malnutrition and hunger and dehydration while we're fighting? But Achilles is like, dudes, I'm fucking ready to fight. Our friends who were killed yesterday by Hector and those who follow Hector are still laying out there in the field, and y'all want to eat and socialize and get drunk and not attack when the Trojans aren't expecting us to? Cool. Awesome. Go ahead and eat. I'll just sit here and wait because I'm too full of fury. And then he just sits there and just sobs while everyone around him eats. And Zeus is a concerned daddy god and is like, well, that is not going to do. And he sends Athena to fill him with like nectar and ambrosia so that he can fight and be successful in battle. So once they're all done, he puts on his new shiny armor and he yokes his horses and he tells them that they better not leave him behind like they left Patroclus behind. And the horses respond because they can fucking talk, and we're just now learning about this, and the whole horses crying over Patroclus' death thing makes so much more sense now. So Mr. Ed is like, dude, we're not going to leave you. We didn't even leave Patroclus. It was Apollo who cut him down. And like, I hope you realize that there's a god coming for you too. And Achilles is like, yeah, I'm fucking ready. But until then, I'm going to hurt as many Trojans as possible. And even Zeus is shitting himself a little bit about Achilles coming back onto the battlefield. And he lifts his restrictions on the deities not being able to interfere because he knows that Achilles will decimate the city before it's time. But the gods are all like, nah, we're good. We're just gonna watch. We popped some popcorn. Mercury went to the Dollar Tree and got like little movie theater candies. We got a drinking game going. It's just like when someone dies, we're gonna take a shot. And it's a good thing we can't die because we're gonna get alcohol poisoning. But before they did that, Apollo went and told Aeneas to challenge Achilles to a fight. And Aeneas is like, nah, been there, done that, almost died. No, thank you. And Apollo is like, you are son of Aphrodite, and your grandfather is Zeus, and his mother is Thetis, a lesser nymph, and her father is the old man of the sea. I'm sure you'll be fine. And Aeneas is like, you know what, you shiny son of a bitch, you're right. I know they say that he's the best warrior, but clearly parentage and nepotism is way more important than natural skill and training. I'ma kill him right now. And so he charges ahead of all the Trojans, and he meets Achilles in like the no man's land in the middle of the battlefield. They exchange insults back and forth, and then Aeneas throws his spear at Achilles. But what he doesn't realize is that because Achilles' new armor is made by Hephaestus himself, it is impenetrable, so it doesn't even phase Achilles, and he just starts charging at Aeneas. Aeneas picks up a boulder that no man should be able to pick up, and he's about to throw it at Achilles, who's still charging, when Poseidon is like, nope, we need to rescue Aeneas now because he's about to get super killed and he shouldn't be suffering for things that aren't his problem. Like, Apollo spurned him on to save Hector for a little while longer, not because he actually cares about Aeneas. And Aeneas is fated to be the main character of the Aeneid, so he can't die now. So Poseidon goes down, puts a mist over Achilles, and just picks up Aeneas and throws him back at the Trojans. Like, literally throws him back into the Trojans. And when Poseidon clears the mist from Achilles' eyes, he's like, astonishing. My spear lies here on the ground, but the man I was trying to kill has completely vanished. He, too, must be loved by the gods. I wasn't here the last time when he was whisked off the field by the gods and healed by Artemis and company, so this is surprising. And this, of course, left Hector to lead the Trojans, but Apollo steps in again this time, and he's like, don't go for Achilles. I tried to send Aeneas in as a distraction to allow him to get killed, but that clearly did not work. So what I need you to do is stay here and don't charge if you want to see your wife Andromache and your baby Astyanax again. So Hector ran back to like the back of the Trojan army, and he stayed there and watched Achilles take down Trojan after Trojan after Trojan, which every single one of them is named in the Iliad, by the way, and he was honestly fine with it until he saw his younger brother Polydorus, who was the most loved by Priam and was never allowed to fight because he was so special and so young, get killed by Achilles. Quite brutally, actually. Honestly, after talking about how some of these other people have died in graphic detail, I don't really want to do much of that anymore. So, quite brutally. And Hector charged at Achilles when he saw his brother fall. And Achilles saw Hector in his revenge running towards him. Hector threw his spear, but Athena swatted it away and made it fall back at Hector's feet. Achilles threw his spear, and Apollo swept Hector's away. And Achilles charged at him 3 times, and each time found nothing but empty air. So in his anger, he starts slaughtering Trojans again. Again, quite horrifically. This book got extremely graphic out of nowhere, and Achilles runs through the center of the Trojan forces, and he splits them in 2. Half is forced towards the city of Troy, and the other half is forced towards the river's commander. And as Achilles is killing people, he's throwing their bodies into the river. And when he gets tired of like slashing and stabbing, he chooses 12 men to spare just for the moment, because he plans to sacrifice them with Patroclus whenever he finally burns the funeral pyre. So Achilles comes upon a man named Lycaon, who was the son of Priam. This isn't the first time that Achilles and Lycaon have met. Achilles actually sold Lycaon into slavery, and he had only just gotten back into Troy like less than 2 weeks ago. And Achilles throws his spear, but Lycaon dodges it and clutches Achilles' knees and begs for mercy. But Achilles tells him that he has no intention on sparing any Trojan, and that death comes for everyone. And if someone could have been spared, then it would have been Patroclus, who is better than anyone, Trojan or Greek. I mean, look at me. I'm supposedly the greatest warrior of all time, and death is waiting close by for me too. And he kills Lycaon and throws him into the river Scamander and says, quote, lie with the fish now. They will lick the blood clean from your wounds without rituals. Your dear mother won't lay you out and mourn for you. The Scamander will carry you into the sea. And with this, the river becomes enraged and takes on a human form. And he's like, enough, Achilles. You need to stop slaughtering people and throwing them in me. This is appalling. And it's also appalling that none of these men will now have funeral rites. And Achilles is like, sorry, bro, I'll stop throwing them in you, but like, I'm not going to stop killing Trojans until I fight Hector to the death. And he turns away and starts attacking more Trojans. And Scamander calls out to Apollo, and he's shaming Apollo for letting so many Trojans die, and reminds him that Apollo is supposed to be protecting them. But before he could say anything else, Achilles rears back, hearing this, and starts like literally attacking the river. And in response, Scamander threw the dead bodies at Achilles, and then the waves like surged around him, and it knocks him off balance, and he goes to grab an elm tree, and the river just rips that out of the ground, and it creates like a dam, and Achilles panics because he's almost drowned at this point. So he uses the tree to climb out of the river and run to dry land, but the river isn't done with him yet, and grabs his feet and drags him back into the water, and Achilles cries out to the gods for help. He's basically like, is there not one god or goddess that is seeing me struggle and will help me? I would rather die literally any other way. And I've been lied to this whole time because I was told that I would die under Troy's wall by one of Apollo's arrows, not fucking drowning. And then he's pulled under the water again. And Poseidon and Athena are finally like, okay, fine. So they disguise themselves as humans and are like, we're going to rescue you, Achilles, but first we're going to give you some advice. You took a big gulp of air before you went under, right? Okay, great. So don't be afraid. This is Poseidon, and Athena and I are here to save you. We've come from Olympus to help you. Zeus approved it, so don't worry. You okay? You're looking a little blue. Anyway, it isn't your fate to die in this river, even though it might seem like that right now. Scamander will get over it here in just a minute, but while we're waiting for that, we're going to give you some advice, and we know that you'll listen because it's not like you can go anywhere right now. Anyway, we need you to push all the Trojans into the walls of Troy. Don't stop fighting until then, and do not go back to the ships until you kill Hector, because you will kill Hector today. And then they left. But Athena filled him with strength before she left, so he just like walks out of the river. And as much as Scamander tries to drag him back, he just like, whatever, go away. This part of the story is finished, and it was merely a plot device so that Athena and Poseidon could tell me their plan, okay? But Scamander doesn't relent. He goes for another attack with all intentions of ending Achilles' life right then and there, gods be damned. And then Hephaestus comes down and sets fire to the entire field that starts boiling the river. And Scamander is like, okay, I'll stop. I don't know why y'all are attacking me so hard for trying to help the Trojans when you have fucking Apollo just being Apollo right now. But okay, I swear I will never help them again, even if the entire city goes up in flames. What my English degree taught me is called foreshadowing. Who said English degrees are useless? Then the gods randomly start fighting for some reason. Athena and Ares start fighting. He wants revenge for when Diomedes stabbed him, but Athena's a lot stronger and she wins. Aphrodite comes in and whisks away Ares so that he doesn't get injured any more than that. Athena runs after them and just punches Aphrodite just right in the boob. And Ares and Aphrodite are both just laying there in the dirt, and Athena shouts that everyone who helps Trojans will end up like this. Except for Apollo, because Apollo is one of the strongest in this story. He and Poseidon fight. And it's hilarious because Poseidon is like, no. You can attack me first. I insist. And Apollo is like, no. I wouldn't dare fight you, especially for mortals who are like leaves. And Artemis sort of like shit talks him for that, but he ignores her. But Hera doesn't. Hera steps in and calls Artemis a sniveling bitch, and then grabs both of Artemis' wrists in her left hand and just starts bitch slapping her over and over with her right hand until Artemis squirms out and bursts into tears and runs away to Daddy Zeus to complain about her stepmom. And all the while, Achilles is just killing the shit out of Trojans. I don't know why we needed this little interlude of the gods fighting, but I fucking love it. So I included it in my retelling. So Priam is standing on the walls of Troy and he's watching Achilles, and he gives the order to open the gates and allow all the Trojans to come back in to escape Achilles and his wrath. And Achilles was about to take the city when a man named Agenor challenged him. But before Achilles could kill him, Apollo swept him away back into Troy and took on Agenor's form to further distract Achilles. So Apollo, as Agenor, runs off towards Scamander to allow all of the Trojans to make their way into the walls of Troy. And after a little while, Apollo is basically like, why are you still chasing me, Achilles? Haven't you caught on yet that I am a god? Haven't you noticed that while you were chasing me, all the Trojans retreated? And Achilles is like, well, fuck. But he notices that there's one Trojan that has not retreated. Hector. For some reason, Hector has found himself planted into the ground, and he was not able to move. And Achilles chastises Apollo for his cruel trick, and then rushes back to the gates of Troy. Priam is still standing on the wall of Troy, and he calls down to Hector and begs his son to not fight Achilles. And then Hector's mother, Hecuba, starts crying and pulls out her boob and is like, remember when I used to breastfeed you from this left tit? Remember that, and don't fight Achilles. But no matter what they said or what body parts they whipped out to show him, they couldn't convince him to flee. And as Achilles got closer, he was no longer filled with courage that he's had this whole time. And Hector runs away. And so Achilles chases him. The gods and goddesses are watching, and Zeus is already mourning for Hector. He's like, we have to decide if we're going to save Hector or not. And Athena's like, what the fuck? Why the fuck are we here? He's destined to be killed by Achilles, and you're going to save him. Why don't we just save everybody? What? You know what? Why don't we just go ahead and bring everyone back from the dead and start over? You know what, Dad? Do whatever you want, but there will be people who are not happy about this if you save Hector. And it's me. I will not be happy about this. I have been bending over fucking backwards for the Greeks this entire time for 10 fucking years, and you're just not gonna let this war end? So Zeus brings out a scale and weighs the lives of Achilles and Hector, and Hector's portion sinks down towards death. And even Apollo did not intervene with what came next. So Hector's favorite and closest brother, Deiphobus, came to Hector and was like, let's fight him together. I will not leave your side. You'll die if you fight him by yourself, but maybe together we'll stand a chance. And Hector's like, I knew you were my favorite brother. I love you more than anyone else. Thank you so much for coming to my aid when everyone else has fled into Troy. And his brother's like, oh yeah, our mom and dad totally tried to convince me to stay, but I had to come because my heart broke for you. Let's just charge him now. And so Hector turned to charge at Achilles and is like, I'm not running anymore. Let's fight. But before we do, let's swear an oath that we will not defile each other's bodies and return them back to each other's families. And Achilles is like, no. Okay, so we're doing this. So Hector turns towards Deiphobus and is like, hand me a spear, dear brother. Only to find that his brother is in fact not there. Because it was a trick by Athena. She had disguised herself as his brother to make him fight Achilles. And Hector is like, oh shit. Time to die, I guess. I spent all this time thinking that Zeus and Apollo were on my side. And it turns out that they were just waiting for me to die at the right time. Poor Hector Potter, the boy who lived but wouldn't live for much longer. Especially because he was wearing Achilles' armor that he stole from Patroclus, which means that Achilles knows exactly what spots are vulnerable, namely your fucking throat. So Achilles aims for the throat and does not miss, gets that weak spot in the armor. But he didn't sever Hector's windpipe. Homer made sure to say this, that before he dies, he begs Achilles again to allow him to have proper burial rites, which I find really funny. Or not funny, but I guess sort of like ironic. Because when he was killing Patroclus, he was like literally fighting over Homeboy's corpse so that he could impale his head on the wall of Troy and turn the rest of him into dog food. To be fair, this is all told from like the Greek perspective, which means in reading it, I'm supposed to think that the Greeks are good and the Trojans are bad. But I don't think this. I don't think there are any good guys or bad guys in the story. I think that this war is just making everyone sort of morally gray. So I'm not pointing this out because I think that Hector is a bad guy. I'm just pointing this out because it's kind of hypocritical that he's like begging in his final moments for that when he wasn't going to give the same honors to other people, especially the person that Achilles loved most in the world. So Achilles tells him no, that he plans on doing to Hector what Hector attempted to do to Patroclus. And with Hector's final breath, he said that there will come a day when Paris and Apollo will cut him down and death will come for him. And Achilles is like, okay, thanks. And then all the Greeks come to see Hector's corpse and they all stab his corpse as Achilles started to strip off of his armor. And then Achilles further mutilates Hector's body before tying it to his chariot and dragging it back to the Greek camp. And the entire time, Priam and Hecuba were watching from the gates of Troy. And Hecuba starts screaming, and all of the Trojans start wailing. And Priam, in his grief, attempts to follow Achilles. And people are, like, literally holding Priam back. And he's screaming at people, just let him go, and that maybe Achilles would take pity on him. And if not, then just let him die. And as everyone is mourning, no one has come to tell Hector's wife Andromache. She was in her room at her loom making him a robe, and she was asking her handmaidens to start warming water so that he could have a hot bath when he returned for the night. And then she started hearing the cries, specifically the cries of Hecuba. So she ran to the walls of Troy to see what the commotion was and saw Hector being dragged behind Achilles' chariot, and at that sight she fainted. When she came to, she lamented that she wished that she was never born, so that she would never have to feel this pain, and so that their son Astyanax would never know the suffering that his life would now be full of. And there's definitely like a parallel there between the mourning of Achilles over Patroclus and like the mourning of Andromache over Hector, but Patroclus and Achilles were just friends, right? There's nothing there, right? So back behind the Greek lines, Achilles arrives with Hector's corpse and immediately starts grieving for Patroclus again. And Achilles tells Patroclus that he did what he said he would do. And finally, the funeral rites began. Achilles set out a massive funerary feast. And everyone is like, dude, you're gross. You're covered in dirt and blood and water from the scamander. You need to take a bath. And he swears that he will not bathe until he burns Patroclus's body. But he wasn't going to burn Patroclus's body tonight because he wanted one more night sleeping by his friend's side. And when he fell asleep that night, Patroclus' spirit came to him. And Patroclus recognized how much Achilles loved and cared for him during life, but now that he's died, he tells Achilles that he's neglecting him because he hasn't received those funeral rites yet. And because of that, the spirits that guard the underworld aren't letting him enter the underworld. And he also asks him, to hold him one last time while they're dreaming, because once he's burned, he can never come back and hold him again. And he can't sit and talk to him or share a meal with him. And he knows, just like Achilles does, that Achilles is fated to die soon as well. So he makes a request that their bones be buried together so that they can be together always, just like they were always in life from the day that he came to Pythia until the day he died. And Achilles promises that he will do everything that Patroclus asks him to. When he reaches out to try and hold him one last time, Patroclus' spirit vanishes like smoke and he's yanked back into the underworld. And he awoke, Achilles woke crying hysterically. And like, I was crying hysterically when I was reading this too. It was very sad to read. So Achilles goes and tells everyone around him what transpired in his dream and that he's confident that there is life after death, which I think is really interesting because a lack of faith is not really something that I associate with Greek mythology because it seems so ingrained into it. So to have a piece of Greek mythology with a character who is questioning his faith and is relatively like agnostic, even though he's in such close contact with the gods and like literally descends from a goddess, is really interesting. That he like sort of questioned what fate mortals would have after they died, that he knew the existence of gods and goddesses, but didn't really know what happened to mortals. So Achilles spent the rest of the night crying for Patroclus, and then the next morning Agamemnon sent men out to gather wood for the funeral pyre that Achilles was building for Patroclus and himself. And then they carried in Patroclus, and Achilles walked behind him, like cradling his head and crying, and like all the Greeks are cutting locks of their hair off and throwing it onto Patroclus so a part of them would be with him forever. And Achilles cut off an especially large lock, like practically giving himself a bald spot, and put it in Patroclus's hands so that he would be holding Achilles as he burned. And it doesn't say this, but I think it's because they couldn't hold each other the night before or ever again in this life. And everyone watching starts weeping all over again, and I'm weeping as I'm reading this, and I'm crying as I'm reciting this. It's very sad, and I think like it really touches on grief, like big time, you know? It's not just like grief for a friend, it's like he loved him so much. And Achilles, before he lights Patroclus's pyre on fire, he asks everyone to leave except for those who were actually close to Patroclus. He only wants those to be there while he burns. So Achilles sacrificed sheep and bulls and 4 horses and 2 of his pet dogs and the 12 Trojan men that he spared from the Scamander. And he threw the torch, but the pyre wasn't lighting. And he prayed to the north and west winds to help. And when they listened, he spent the rest of the night pouring libations for them and weeping while he watched his friend burn. The next day, he throws funeral games for Patroclus's honor, and Athena helps Diomedes win. Achilles couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned all night, and each morning he would get in his chariot and ride it around, dragging Hector's body around Patroclus's tomb 3 times. And after 12 days of doing this every morning, the gods have finally had enough. And they go to Priam and they tell him that if he goes to Achilles, he'll be safe and he can get Hector back. And when he arrives, he begs Achilles. He asks him to think of his own father and how much they love each other, and asks him to recognize that the same love exists between him and Hector. And Achilles agrees and calls off the fighting while they have their funeral rites for Hector. And Priam takes them back to Troy, and the Iliad ends with the burning of Hector's body. And it's weird that the Iliad, the story of the Trojan War, and the story of Achilles, doesn't end with the Trojan horse or the death of Achilles. No, no, no. It ends with Achilles making sure that Patroclus, his beloved friend who he loves more than anything, is taken care of and in the underworld with his intentions to follow after as soon as possible after he takes revenge against Hector, but writes it. And how anyone can think that the Iliad is anything other than the love story of Achilles and Patroclus during the time of war, you can fucking fight me. Troy Part 6. And it all ends with a horse. So the rest of the story of the Trojan War is pieced together over about like 17 different sources. So there's going to be times when I'm telling this where it's like, one version says this, but like one version also says this. So I mostly took this from Robert Graves' book, but I did have to like look up supplemental information as well. So after Hector is burned, the fighting continues. Robert Graves writes about an Amazon that came to Troy named Penthesilea to be purified by Priam for a murder that she committed, and in return she fought for him. And after Hector was killed, she became one of the best warriors on the Trojan side. There are some stories that say that she was one of the only ones who actually had a chance of killing Achilles outright. And one story, according to Graves, even says that she did, and that Thetis begged him to be resurrected, and that later he killed her, then fell in love with her corpse, and committed necrophilia. Which makes me uncomfy, but this is effed up history / effed up mythology, so that's just kind of a theme here. So a man named Memnon comes from Ethiopia, and he is also a formidable opponent as well. He kills Antilochus, who was the one who broke the news of Patroclus' death to Achilles when he was defending his father Nestor. So he's described as one of the youngest, handsomest, swiftest, and most courageous Greeks, Antilochus says. And I think that this shows like the loss that can really happen during war. Even the youngest and most courageous and most beautiful are not immune from death. And when Achilles found out about Antilochus' death, he fought Memnon himself and killed him. And it seems like Achilles, again, is unstoppable. Even the strongest warriors cannot bring him down. But his pride had gotten to be too much. And Apollo was very offended with how he treated Hector and the things that he said to his corpse that we're not privy of. And apparently it was so bad that Poseidon, who had been on the side of the Greeks for the entirety of the war, conspired with Apollo about how to bring down Achilles. In the heat of battle, Achilles chased the Trojans back into Troy and entered the city, and he found himself at the temple of Apollo. He was attempting to take the city for himself and win glory for the Greeks when Paris saw him. Paris, who was world-renowned for his skill with a bow and arrow, fired shots at Achilles, and Apollo stepped in and guided his arrows straight to that one sensitive spot on him, that one spot that would ensure his death, his heel. And Achilles died in agony, but he welcomed his death. There are, however, some versions that say it wasn't Paris at all who did this. It was actually Apollo who disguised himself as Paris, who is one who killed Achilles. But even though Achilles was killed, it was said that he was undefeated in battle and the greatest warrior of all time, because many during this time looked at the bow and arrow as the coward's weapon, because you didn't actually have to enter battle with anyone to kill them. So again, he's considered undefeated in battle. So it's another reason why a lot of the great warriors looked down on Paris as well, because he was just really well known for his bow and arrow and sort of like considered a coward. So a fight then ensues over Achilles' body, but he was defended by Odysseus and Ajax the Great. Ajax carried him back to the Greek camp over his shoulder while Odysseus was defending him. He was mourned for 17 days and nights by mostly the leaders of the army, like Odysseus, Agamemnon, Diomedes, Menelaus, Nestor, Ajax, etc., etc. Those who were close to him, who may have at like one time or another called him a friend. But the lesser soldiers didn't really feel anything for him and his death, because a lot of them viewed Achilles as a traitor for letting a small feud between him and Agamemnon blossom into death for so many of their comrades. On the 18th day, the Greeks built a funeral pyre for Achilles and burned his body, and then mixed his remains with Patroclus's in a beautiful golden urn that was made by Hephaestus and given to Thetis on her wedding day. Now, there are some stories about what happened with him after his death. Some say that he was resurrected and married Helen, becoming her fifth husband, which I'll explain that in further detail a little bit later. Others say that they married in the underworld. Another story says that he married my favorite mythological serial killer, Medea, in the underworld, and they live together to this day in the Islands of the Blessed. But of course, I like to think that Achilles and Patroclus are together in the underworld. That wouldn't have been a thing that was like concluded in Greek mythology, but I like to hope that the underworld is an LGBTQ plus friendly place. Now, once Achilles was burned and buried, Thetis took his armor and said that only the bravest of the Greeks could receive it. And Odysseus and Ajax the Great stepped forward because they showed great bravery while they were defending his remains. And they all sort of fought over it a little bit. Everyone wanted beautiful armor that was created by a god. So Odysseus and Ajax are boasting their achievements back and forth, and Nestor comes up with a plan to see what the Trojans have to say about it. So they send a spy to listen to what the young women of Troy are saying about the Greek men, and some of them are praising Ajax for how strong he is and how he defended Achilles' corpse, while others are like, no, that's bullshit. Even a slave would defend their master's corpse from being defiled. It was actually Odysseus who fought more bravely. So When the spies report back to the Greek camps, Agamemnon awards the armor to Odysseus and pissed the ever-loving shit out of Ajax the Great when he did so, and Ajax plotted his revenge. So Ajax's plan was to slaughter all of the leaders of the Greek army because he was so insulted. But Athena learned of his treachery and made him temporarily insane. So he mistook cattle for the great Greeks that he was plotting against. He slaughtered a ton of them, but took 2 back to his tent. For the one that he mistook as Agamemnon, he cut out its tongue and then cut off its head. And then the other one, who he thought was Odysseus, he tied to a pillar and tortured for the rest of the night. The next morning, he came to his senses and realized what happened and killed himself with his own sword. And this whole ordeal was absolutely pointless when Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, arrives and Odysseus has passed the armor onto him. But like, oh my God, we've talked so long about these people. What about Troy? How does this stupid war end that I feel like I'm talking about for 10 years? Well, the Greeks were curious about this too. Their best warrior was dead. Their second best warrior had just killed himself after going mad. So Odysseus and Diomedes go to Calchas the seer and ask him what they have to do. And he said, there's no way that Troy will fall without the bow and arrows of Heracles. Slight problem there. Heracles' bow and arrows were with Philoctetes. A new name? So close to the end, Krystina? Yes, friend. So long story short with good old Phil is that he was gifted the bow and arrow by Heracles. He was the owner of it. He was also a suitor of Helen all those years ago, and so swore an oath and had to come to Troy. But he never made it to Troy because somehow he got a terrible wound on his foot that festered. And Odysseus proposed that they just leave him on the island of Lemnos for 10 years while they fought the Trojans. Well, this certainly puts us in a pickle. And Odysseus, our favorite tricky dude, is like, oh, let's just sail there real quick and go get it. It's only about 50 miles away. I'm sure he's dead by now. We left him there with a super infected foot 10 years ago. And boy, were they surprised when he was in fact not dead, but had been healed and was just angrily living in Lemnos ever since. And he was especially perturbed with good old Odysseus, who came up with the idea to leave him there. And Odysseus, the tricky bastard that he is like, let's just fool him into giving it to us. And Diomedes is like, or we can just ask him for it. Philoctetes is like, totally, I will bring the bow and arrows of Heracles myself, because Heracles actually came to me in a dream and told me that I will be chosen as the boldest among the Greeks. And since you fucking left me here, I have a lot of pent up rage. And he took out that rage on Paris. So he challenged him to an archery duel. Philoctetes' first arrow missed. His second struck Paris's bow hand. And the third went into Paris's fucking eye. And the fourth, in a way that is not at all similar to what we have seen before, hit him in the ankle. Paris was able to sort of like hobble back into Troy and was taken to the nymph Oenone, who was his first lover that he pushed aside for Helen. And she took one look at him and remembered how he slighted her all those years ago, and she refused, because the underworld hath no fury like a woman scorned. And so he died. There are some translations that say that she later regretted this and only told him no in a moment of passion. And later she ran into Troy with all of her healing herbs and found that she was too late. So, quote, this is Robert Graves' quote, in a frenzy of grief, she leaped from the walls, or hanged herself, or burned herself to death on his pyre. No one really remembers which. So we don't remember how this nymph killed herself. That's actually like quite important to the story of Paris. But half of the fucking Iliad consists of random ass dudes who have no mythology. And it's the first and last time that they are mentioned. But we have this like whole ass lesser deity here who I mean, who gives a shit about her, because it is a her, right? So now that Paris was dead, Helen couldn't just like not have a husband. So Helenus, who was a man, and Deiphobus, who was Hector's favorite brother, fought over who would have her next, like a hand-me-down shirt. Now, If you ask me, Helen and Helena sound adorable. It's like when like Krista's and Christopher's get together. So cute. Expect you to wear matching sweaters. But King Priam steps in and decides that Deiphobus was the better suitor and gave him his blessing. But Helen, who is still filled with longing for her husband Menelaus and wanting to go back to her fucking children with literally nothing to keep her in Troy anymore, tries to sneak out in the middle of the night. But nay, women cannot have a say in their lives, friends. And she was found by a guard and was, quote, married by force to Deiphobus. So Helenus was very upset, and he immediately leaves Troy to go back to his city when he's kidnapped by the Greeks. But he was totally okay with being kidnapped because he had deserted Troy, not because he feared death, but because he could not overlook Paris sacrilegiously murdering Achilles in the Temple of Apollo that no one attempted to make amends for. So he told the Greeks that he would tell them whatever they wanted if they could ensure that he would be given a safe home in a distant land. And Odysseus, who I never trust, promises that he will, and Helenus tells him that Troy will fall this summer as long as the bone of Pelops is brought to the camp. Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, takes to the fields, and if Athena's palladium is stolen from her temple. Okay, then. Helenus is like a little bit of a seer, so that's how he was able to tell all of this. So they go and get Pelops' shoulder bone, and then some of the men go to Skyros to get Neoptolemus, who was only about 12 at the time, but like a little fucking terrifying. And then they think on how they will steal Athena's palladium. And wouldn't you know, the answer just walks into their camp. See, the fighting between the sons of Priam had gotten so bad that he sent his son Antenor to Agamemnon to negotiate peace. But Antenor had treason in his heart. He told the men that he would just give them the palladium and therefore the city. All he wanted in return was to rule Troy and take half of the riches when the city fell. So Odysseus, that tricky bastard, dresses in rags and has Diomedes whip him so that when he ran into Troy, he would appear not as king of Ithaca and one of the leaders of the army, but as a runaway slave. And Helen was like, yeah, sure, of course you are. I've known Odysseus for years, and you don't look like Odysseus at all. You are clearly a slave of the Greeks. Get me the fuck out of here. So then he leaves without her. But what he does do is steal the palladium while he's there. There are other translations that the Greeks got the palladium different ways, but him getting the shit beat out of him and disguising himself as a slave doesn't make sense. So he gets the shit beat out of him. He disguises himself as a slave, breaks into Troy, and then leaves. And then, goes back to Troy with, Diomedes to steal a palladium, which Odysseus may or may not have tried to steal from Diomedes. And then they build the Trojan horse to sneak back into Troy again. So it doesn't make sense. If you're going to dress up as a slave and get whipped and, break into Troy, then, just steal it while you're there, you know? So, yeah. Now, we are finally at what we've all been waiting for, the entire reason why I even chose to do the story of Troy in the first place. And 44 pages of single space notes later, I am finally here. Outside of Troy, there was a horse. Not just any horse, but a giant wooden horse. Now, the horse was the symbol of Troy, so it wasn't just some random animal that they chose sitting out there. And on the horse, they carved, quote, in thankful anticipation of a safe return to their homes, the Greeks dedicate this offering to the goddess, meaning Athena. And the Greeks were gone. Overnight, they had burned down their camp and sailed away, and it seems like the Trojans won the war. So Priam comes out with some of his men and they debate what to do with this giant wooden horse. Some people said that it should be brought to Athena's temple because it was dedicated to her, while others said that Athena had favored the Greeks the entire time and they should either burn it or break it open and see what's inside. One man even throws a spear at it to show his discontent. But Priam ruled that it should be brought to Athena. She caused them enough harm during the war, they didn't want to upset her further. Maybe now that Paris is dead, she'll get off their fucking backs and forget the whole apple for the fairest thing, right? The horse was so large, it couldn't even make it through the gates. It actually broke the wall into Troy, but don't worry, they repaired it so that no one could sneak in. But Cassandra took one look at it and began screaming that there were armed men inside and they should get rid of it immediately. And no one listened, because no one ever listens to Cassandra. But then another seer confirmed this. But before the arguments could begin again, a Greek named Sinon was brought into Troy and confirmed that actually all the Greeks had left. The Greeks were sick of war and they wanted to leave months ago, but the weather didn't really permit it. Before we left for Troy, we had to sacrifice Iphigenia, so we figured that there must be a sacrifice needed this time as well. So we asked Calchas, and after 10 days, he named me. And just as they were about to kill me, the winds changed and they seized their opportunity, and I barely escaped with my life, and they deserted me here. And as for the giant horse, well, you see, when we stole the palladium from Athena, she was so betrayed that we lost her favor. The palladium literally burst into flames the moment that it arrived in camp. So we built this large horse to honor her, and also you as well. You didn't bring it in the city, did you? Oh no, we made it so big hoping that you wouldn't be able to get through the gates, because before we left, Calchas also told us that if the horse made it into the city of Troy, Troy would get all the troops of Asia to join them in their invasion, and they would conquer Greece. With this, the Trojans celebrated, but they shouldn't, because everything that Sinon said was a lie. So what actually happened was a few days before, Athena went to a man named Prilus and whispered in his ear to suggest that they should get into Troy by means of a large wooden horse. Now, of course, it was Athena's idea, offered to the Greeks by Prilus, and then it was later built by a man named Appius. But, of course, that tricky twat waffle Odysseus took all the credit for it. So they built the Trojan horse out of fir. And in case you were wondering what kind of wood it was, we can't remember why Oenone killed herself, but it's important to know that it was specifically fir wood that built the Trojan horse. And then in the dead of night, the Greeks burned down their camps, and all the Greeks got on their ships and sailed just out of sight, while 23 or 30 or 50 or possibly even 3,000 men climbed into the horse. That is also another literal quote from Robert Graves, by the way. That's not me being sarcastic about how many men there were. There were either 23 or 30 or 50 or 3,000. So the entire time while they were debating what to do with the horse and bringing it inside and conversing with Sinon, the Greeks were just chilling inside. Most of them are nervous, except for fucking Neoptolemus, because he's a psychopath. Remember how I mentioned that someone threw a spear at the horse? It embedded right next to Neoptolemus's head, and he didn't even fucking flinch. But Helen, she's super smart, and she immediately understands what's happening. And so she's walking around the horse with Deiphobus, her new husband by force, and she's imitating all the wives of the men inside, to the point where they are trying to jump out of the horse to get to her, to get to who they believe their wives are out there. Now, depending on what book you read, she may or may not have known what they were doing, and that there were Greeks inside of it. Some translations just say that she assumed that's what happened, and then some say that she was completely in on it and understood exactly what happened and had a really big part in Troy's downfall. So that night, the Trojans partied hard. They slept hard. They passed the fuck out. And while they were sleeping, the Greeks snuck out of the horse and into Troy. So some ran for the gates to signal to the Greeks waiting on the boats to come. Some silently took out the guards, and Menelaus and Odysseus ran straight to Helen, the former contemplating killing her and the later wanting to save her. So when they made it to Deiphobus' house, they engaged in what is regarded as the bloodiest and hardest battle of the war that was ended when Helen plunged a dagger into her new husband's back. Menelaus, who had all intentions of killing her, looked at her and his heart swelled, and he brought her to the safety of the ship to bring her back to Sparta. King Priam was taking refuge with his wife and daughters at the altar of Zeus when one of his sons was murdered by Neoptolemus right in front of him. Priam tried to retaliate, but Damian from the ancient Greek version of the Omen killed him and dragged his body to his father's grave to let it rot. Again, Neoptolemus is 12. It was complete pandemonium. Trojans were being killed before they even knew what hit them, and while they were still sleeping. Cassandra ran to the temple of Athena, clutching a wooden sculpture that was intended to replace the palladium that was stolen by the Greeks. And she was praying to Athena for help, even though the goddess hadn't helped the Trojans the entire war, when Ajax the Lesser came in and sexually assaulted her in Athena's temple. It was so bad and so offensive to the virgin goddess that it said that the replacement palladium kept its eyes upturned towards the sky as if horror-stricken. Ajax the Lesser then dragged her back to the Greek camp to make her his concubine, which was the common fate for Trojan women. But when the Greeks heard what Ajax did to Cassandra, they were appalled. They were angry. Agamemnon was pissed off to the highest, and he announces to the entire army what Ajax did, and Ajax was hated by all of them. And then Agamemnon, in his fury, took Cassandra as his own concubine and assaulted her. But it was okay because it wasn't in Athena's temple, and Agamemnon is like now known for just stealing women from other men, so it's totally fine. Although there's some versions of the story that say Ajax didn't do that at all, that he didn't sexually assault her, and Agamemnon, when he saw Cassandra, just decided that he wanted her for himself and got Odysseus to spread these rumors about Ajax the Lesser so that he could have her. So once the Trojans were sufficiently massacred and the treasures were split amongst the Greeks and sacrifices were made to the gods, there was then the question of what to do with the remaining survivors, especially the women and children. So the first one in question was Hector's son, Astyanax. Now, after some back and forth, Odysseus recommended that all the descendants of Priam should be eradicated and then hurled baby Astyanax off the wall of Troy. Now, there are some stories that it was Neoptolemus who did this because he took Andromache as his concubine and prize. This is the only version that I knew, and that is why I mentioned that I thought Neoptolemus was evil incarnate at the age of 12, but it seems like I might have been wrong. And even if Neoptolemus was the one who actually killed baby Astyanax, it was Odysseus's idea. Why do people like him? Odysseus, that is. He tricks everybody. He only ever looks out for himself. He's a baby murderer. And the entirety of the Odyssey consists of him continuing to trick people, blinding a Cyclops, cheating on his wife multiple times, lying to his crew, watching as every one of his men dies, tricking his son, lying to his wife and father, and then viciously murdering 108 men and countless female servants who committed the crime of trying to marry a woman that was believed to be a widow who respected her wishes, to wait until she finished a project that lasted 20 years. Odysseus is not great. Unless I am missing something. He's one of the most intelligent mythological figures, but and this idea of his led to a lot of children being murdered, not just Astyanax. Priam had anywhere from 50 to 69 sons, remember? And many of them were grown and had children of their own. There is one story of a little boy named Polydorus who is different than the other Polydorus that we mentioned because Priam just started recycling names. You can only have so many Hectors and Parises and Polydoruses. You just had to start recycling them after a while, right? So Polydorus is Priam's son, but he's raised by a man named Polymnestor. So Agamemnon bribes this caretaker Polymnestor, who had raised Polydorus as his own. Agamemnon offers his daughter Electra if he murders the little boy. But Polymnestor couldn't bring himself to do it because he swore to protect Polydorus. So instead, Polymnestor killed his own son and passed it off as Polydorus because a pretty new wife is more important than your child. Oh no, that may have been some self-projection there. That said a lot about me there. So later on, Polydorus learns that from the Oracle of Apollo who his parents actually were and what Polymnestor did, and he blinds Polymnestor before stabbing him to death. Another time I don't hate the Oracle, I suppose. So back to the spoils of the Trojan War, and by that, of course, I mean the women of Troy. The next one to be argued about is Polysena, who was the sister of Cassandra. When they were debating what to do with her, Neoptolemus stepped forward and said that his father Achilles came to him in a dream and demanded that he be sacrificed at his tomb because it wasn't fair that he didn't get his gifts, and he would have the winds withheld until they did so, which I didn't think that just regular dead mortals could do. I thought withholding the winds was something that only the gods and goddesses can do, but apparently Achilles in the afterworld becomes Storm or something. So, yeah. Agamemnon disagrees with this and was dead people don't get gifts. Yeah, he did a lot. Not so much in the Iliad, but in the years before the Iliad and in the 3 days after Patroclus' death. And I find this very interesting because it creates a parallel between the beginning and end of the war, when Agamemnon was totally okay with his daughter being sacrificed to bring back the winds, but he wasn't okay now with this woman being sacrificed. And maybe it says something to how war changed him, or maybe he had seen the error of his ways in the years since and regretted what he did with his daughter. Or maybe he was just trying to get into Cassandra's pants by standing up and trying to save her sister. The Greeks all thought it was the latter. And when he tried to argue, Odysseus was the one who convinced him to give it up. And Odysseus was the one who retrieved Polysena and brought her to her death, where he held her as Neoptolemus sacrificed her. Again, why do we like Odysseus? Oh, maybe we like Odysseus because he was given Hecuba, Priam's wife, and the former queen of Troy as his prize. And she, after having her husband and all of her friends and many of her children murdered in front of her, and the Greeks seeking to murder all the rest of her children, or, well, all the rest of her male children, while her daughters were being auctioned off as sex slaves, and she herself was now to become a sex slave. She didn't really like this arrangement of being given to Odysseus. And she apparently uttered such hideous insults and abuses at Odysseus that he saw no other alternative than to kill her. And he called her burial site the bitch's tomb. I mean, like, we all know that I hate Theseus, but, like, Odysseus is rising in the ranks. So once they all had their prizes of war, the Greeks boarded their ships and left Troy, making their way back to their respective cities in Greece. So Antenor, as was promised when he betrayed Troy, was appointed as king of Troy. But honestly, like, Troy was really just a shadow of itself after the Trojan War. It never really got back to being this grand sort of city that it was before that. Now, for the main men of Greece and their stories. So Nestor just went back home to his life in Pylos. Some translation says that he was gone even before the sack of Troy. He was the only one who had like a relatively happy ending. He died old in his bed with like all of his children and his wives and people who loved him surrounding him. Yay for Nestor. Diomedes returned back home to Argos and found that his wife had been unfaithful to him. This was actually orchestrated by Aphrodite after he attacked her. His wife also raised some claims that maybe he shouldn't have been king of Argos, and people came and attacked him and almost killed him. So he sailed to what is now Italy and founded a city known as Argyripa. Calchas the seer died of a broken heart after he met a seer that was better than him. Neoptolemus left and became king of Epirus. He brought Andromache with him and they had multiple children, which I'm sure she was like super excited about. He was later killed by Apollo. He went to Delphi to see the oracle of Apollo and he demanded reparations from the god for killing his father Achilles. And when the oracle told him no, he plundered and burned the shrine down and then went to Sparta and yelled at Menelaus because he swore that Menelaus had promised him his daughter Hermione, but ended up giving her to Orestes, who we will get to in a moment. Menelaus ended up agreeing to allow Neoptolemus to marry Hermione, but Apollo cursed him and she never had any children. So he went back to the temple of Apollo and after some arguing and failed sacrifices, he was killed by a woman who Apollo pushed to commit the act. When Menelaus and Agamemnon were leaving Greece, they actually got into a really big fight and never saw each other again. The fight was basically about Agamemnon wanting to sacrifice to thank Athena for all of her help, and Menelaus saying no. This pissed off Athena, and she made Menelaus' voyage home terrible, but eventually he made it back to Sparta with Helen, and they ruled in Sparta until they died. And when that happened, they went to Elysium, which is sort of like paradise in the underworld where the warriors go. Odysseus did a lot of stuff. He has a whole epic written about him, which is the Odyssey. He fights a Cyclops. He encounters multiple gods and goddesses. He heads to the underworld, comes back from the underworld, listens to sirens, kills a bunch of people, and he's supposed to be a likable character. We'll probably do it at some point. Going over this whole like history and epic has been difficult at times, but I really enjoyed it. So I'll probably do the Odyssey at some point. I'll probably also do the Aeneid at some point, which is the story of Aeneas, which is, I think, the only major story about a Trojan that I can think of after the Trojan War. Most of the stories we hear about the Greeks. Aeneas ends up in Carthage and just like fucks up the lives of everyone there, and eventually goes to establish a city that eventually leads to the founding of Rome. But the biggest story of what happened to like the main warriors after the Trojan War, other than the Odyssey and the Aeneid, is what happened to Agamemnon. So at the beginning of the war, as we've already talked about, Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia. Robert Graves wrote that Agamemnon and Clytemnestra had 4 children together. So they had a son, Orestes, and then 3 daughters, Electra, Chrysothemis and Iphigenia, who we've of course discussed. But Robert Graves, who's like a really big person in mythology, wrote that there are some translations of stories that say that when Theseus abducted Helen, he assaulted her and she got pregnant and gave birth to Iphigenia, and Clytemnestra adopted her because she took pity on her sister and didn't want her reputation and life to be ruined having a baby out of wedlock. And I'm just like, oh my God, is that why Iphigenia was the one to be sacrificed and not one of the other daughters? Because like she wasn't actually the daughter of Agamemnon, so he had no like real affection and ties towards her, like biological. Like Agamemnon would be the kind of guy that would be like, I didn't stick my dick in you and got you pregnant with this kid, so like literally this kid doesn't matter to me. That's just, I just get those vibes from Agamemnon, so I could really see him thinking that way and being totally okay with sacrificing Iphigenia because of that. But regardless if Iphigenia was their child or not, Clytemnestra swore her revenge when he sacrificed Iphigenia, remember? So in the 10 years that he was gone, a lot happened in Mycenae. So I mean, without going into like a long tangent about like the house of Atreus and all of that, there was a man named Aegisthus whose family had a longtime feud with the family of Agamemnon and Menelaus, and they were fighting a lot for the throne of Mycenae. And so when the Greeks left for Troy, Aegisthus heard that Clytemnestra, queen of Mycenae and wife of Agamemnon, wanted to see Agamemnon dead for what he did to their daughter. She also didn't like him because she was initially married to a man named Tantalus, and Agamemnon killed him and then murdered her child with him and then married her by force. Super fine dude. So Aegisthus arrives in Mycenae with a lot of gifts and beautiful words to try and seduce the queen, but she initially rejected him. Not because she wasn't interested, she was, but because Agamemnon had appointed a member of his court to spy on her and report back to him if she was unfaithful at all. Let us not forget, Agamemnon has multiple like prizes in which he was not faithful to his wife during his absence, but as any alpha male podcast will tell you, that is not a problem, king. So Aegisthus found out that this was why she was rejecting him, so he grabbed the spy and marooned him on an island with no food, and then went straight to Clytemnestra's bed, and they ruled together for the 10 years that Agamemnon was gone. And then they received word that the war was over and everyone was coming home. And Agamemnon was not coming home alone. Oh no, he was coming home with Cassandra, who in the interim apparently had twins named Teledamas and Pelops. So when Agamemnon and Cassandra arrived back in Mycenae, Clytemnestra welcomed them. She rolled out an expensive purple carpet. She kissed her husband right on the mouth. She didn't even seem to be concerned about this new female companion and their children. Clytemnestra ushered them inside and told the slaves to prepare them a bath, but Cassandra wouldn't budge. She kept saying that she smelled blood, but she was ignored. Agamemnon went and took a bath. He got 1 foot out of the tub, and Clytemnestra came to him with a towel in her arms. But instead of wrapping him in it, she threw it over his head and entangled him in this net-like fabric that she had woven, and Aegisthus struck him twice with a sword, killing him. Clytemnestra and Aegisthus then went and killed Cassandra and her 2 babies, and she saw it all happen before they even left Troy. But of course, no one believed her. And that, my friends, is finally the end of the Trojan War. 50 single spaced pages of notes later, and we are done. We've laughed, we've cried, we've raged, we've discovered a lot of things, we've questioned a lot of things, we've come to hate people. Odysseus, I'm looking at you. We've come to like people. Achilles, looking at you. Maybe Diomedes. I'm still trying to figure out if I like Diomedes or not. It comes and goes. We've learned a lot. I hope that you enjoyed the product of the last 6 weeks of my life that resulted in this long and unnecessary deep dive into Troy and the Trojan War and all of the major players. I apologize. My voice seemed to kind of go out here at the end. Next time, we will be switching gears entirely and diving into a historical series about one of the most well-known royal families in English history. But until then, if you like what you heard and want to hear more, please leave a review, subscribe, join my Patreon, or just keep listening. I just love that you're here. I just love you guys. And remember, friends, history may be watching you, so don't fuck it up. And for the love of the gods, somebody fucking listen to Cassandra. Bye.